The waters rose, covering even the highest mountains, and for 150 days, the entire world lay submerged beneath the flood. Tonight, we'll journey through the complete biblical account of Noah, the Ark, and the Great Flood, from God's disappointment with humanity to the rainbow promise that followed. As you drift toward sleep, you'll discover the full story beyond just the animals boarding 2 by 2. But before we dive in, if you're new to this channel, consider hitting that like and subscribe button. Also, let us know where you're watching from and what time it is. We're building a global community here. So, without further ado, let's begin, shall we? The calm before the storm. In the days of old, before the waters came, the world was a place of wonders. The sky stretched vast and blue above lush plains, where tall grass swayed in gentle winds. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks sometimes hidden in clouds, sometimes gleaming in sunlight. Streams cut through the land, clear water tumbling over smooth stones, flowing ever onward to join great rivers that fed the seas. The earth was young then. People built homes of wood and stone, tilled fields, tended flocks. They formed towns where markets bustled and children played. By day, smoke rose from cooking fires, and by night, the stars wheeled overhead in their countless hosts. The moon cast silver light across sleeping lands, and all seemed at peace. Yet beneath this calm surface, trouble brewed. The hearts of men had turned from their Maker. The world that had been given as a gift was being spoiled by those who should have cared for it. Where once there had been love, now hate festered. Where once there had been truth, now lies spread. Where once there had been peace, now fights broke out over small things. The Creator watched with sadness as the world he had shaped with such care fell into ruin. He saw how the strong took from the weak. He heard the cries of those who suffered at the hands of others. He felt the pain of a world gone wrong, and his heart grew heavy with grief. Rain was rare in those days before the flood. When it came, it fell soft and brief, just enough to water the crops and fill the streams. No one feared the clouds. No one worried when the sky darkened. Rain was a blessing, not a threat. How strange to think that water, which gives life, would soon bring death. Animals roamed freely then. Lions walked the plains, their golden coats shining in the sun. Birds filled the air with song, from tiny sparrows to mighty eagles. Fish darted through clear waters, scales flashing like jewels. All lived as they had been made to live, each in its place, each playing its part in the grand dance of life. Trees grew tall and strong, their roots deep in the soil, their branches reaching for the light. Fruit hung ripe and sweet. Seeds fell and sprouted, new life always rising from the old. The cycle of seasons turned, spring's tender growth, summer's full bloom, autumn's rich harvest, winter's quiet rest, endless and sure. But a change was coming. The Creator had seen enough. The world he had made good had been bent toward evil. And now a reckoning approached. Not in anger did he plan what would come, but in sorrow and in hope, sorrow for what must end, hope for what might begin anew. And so, as people went about their days, buying and selling, planting and building, laughing and weeping, the last grains of sand were falling through the hourglass of that age. The calm would soon break. The storm would soon come. And only one man would be ready when it did. The air grew thick with waiting. Birds sensed it first, growing restless in their nests. Then animals paused in their grazing, lifting their heads to test the wind. Only humans, in their pride, noticed nothing strange. They alone failed to feel the world holding its breath. Introduction to Noah and his world. In a time when wrong was called right, and right was mocked, Noah walked a different path. His home stood apart from the nearest town, nestled among trees on a gentle rise. Unlike the grand houses of wealthy men, built with stolen goods and slave labor, Noah's dwelling was simple but sound. He had built it with his own hands, each beam and stone placed with care. Noah's face bore the marks of years spent working under the sun, deep lines around eyes that had seen much sorrow, but had not lost their kindness. His beard had grown gray, but his back remained straight, his arms strong from honest work. When he spoke, his voice was low and calm. When he listened, he gave his whole mind to what was said. Each morning, Noah rose before the sun and walked to a quiet spot where he could watch the day begin. There, as light spread across the land, he would speak with his Creator, not in a grand show of words, but in simple truth. He gave thanks for the gift of life and asked for wisdom to use it well. The world around Noah had fallen far from its first glory. Towns had grown into cities, where the rich grew richer and the poor starved. Markets that once traded fair were now dens of cheats. Courts that should have brought justice now sold it to the highest bidder. Temples raised to honor the Creator now housed false gods made of wood and stone, gods who demanded dark gifts. Violence ruled the day. The strong took what they wanted. And so Noah and his family lived like a small island of peace in a sea of chaos. They did not know that soon they would be called to build more than a home, they would build the vessel of the world's last hope. They did not know that their names would be remembered when all others from their time were forgotten. They simply lived each day as it came, doing what was right because it was right, not knowing they were being watched by eyes that saw all. God's decision. The call to purge the earth. The Creator looked upon the world he had made and saw that evil had overtaken good, like weeds choking a garden. Where once there had been order, now chaos ruled. Where once there had been harmony, now discord jarred. The beautiful song he had started had been twisted into harsh noise that pained his heart to hear. It was not a quick choice. This decision to wash the world clean. The Creator had watched and waited, had given chances upon chances for change. He had sent dreams to warn, had placed truth in the hearts of those who would listen, but few did listen. Most turned away, seeking their own paths, building their own gods, writing their own rules that always seemed to favor themselves. Rain clouds began to gather more often now, hanging low and dark before passing on. The air felt strange, too still one day, too wild the next. Animals grew skittish. Birds changed their flight paths. Fish swam in new patterns. The earth itself seemed to sense what was coming, trembling sometimes for no clear cause, as if shivering in dread. The Creator spoke, not with a voice that all could hear, but with words placed directly into Noah's mind as he prayed one dawn. I have seen the evil that fills the earth. The voice said, calm yet heavy with sorrow. Violence covers the land like a flood already, a flood of wrong deeds, wrong thoughts, wrong wants. I am sorry I made them. I will wipe mankind from the face of the earth. Noah fell to his knees, his heart racing with fear, not for himself, but for all people. All, Lord? He asked in the silence of his mind. Must all be lost? You have found favor in my eyes, came the answer. You still walk in my ways when all others have strayed. Through you, I will give life another chance. I will make a covenant with you. That night, Noah could not eat. He sat alone outside, while his family watched with worry. How could he tell them what he had heard? How could he speak of the doom hanging over the world? They would think he had lost his mind with age. Yet, by morning, he knew he must try, for the voice had come again in his dreams. This time with plans. I am going to bring floodwaters on the earth, the Creator had said, to destroy all life under the heavens. But with you, I will set up my covenant. You will enter a boat with your wife, your sons, and their wives. You will bring into the boat 2 of every kind of living creature, to keep them alive with you. When Noah finally spoke to his family, his voice shook, but his eyes were clear. He told them simply what he had been told, that rain would come as had never been seen before. That water would cover the earth, that they alone had been chosen to survive and to save what could be saved of the world's living things. His sons exchanged glances. His wife touched his hand, with worry in her eyes. "Are you sure?" she asked gently. "Perhaps it was just a dream." "I am sure," Noah said. "As sure as I am of the sun's rising. We have work to do, work like none has ever done before." In the days that followed, Noah seemed to age both forward and backward at once. The burden of knowledge bent his shoulders. Yet purpose lit his eyes with youthful fire. He began to gather tools, to study the movement of clouds, to watch the flight of birds with new intensity. He walked the hills around their home, seeking the right place to begin. The wider world knew nothing of what was coming. Towns bustled with trade. Fields were planted for harvests that would never be reaped. Children were born who would not live to walk. Couples pledged love that would be cut short. Kings made plans for rains that would end in water rather than blood or old age. Strange weather came more often now. Wind blew from new directions, bringing scents no one knew. The sun sometimes seemed too bright. The darkness, too deep. Yet few noticed these signs, and those who did quickly forgot them in the rush of daily life. Noah did not forget. Each odd turn of weather, each strange behavior of beast or bird confirmed what he had been told. The world was out of balance, and soon the scales would tip completely. Soon, water would wash away the board. And the game of life would start anew, with just a handful of pieces. As the first wooden beam was cut for what would become the ark, a single raindrop fell, larger than any raindrop should be, and struck the wood with a sound like a small bell. Noah looked up at the sky, clear blue with just one small cloud, and knew that time was running short. The countdown to catastrophe had begun. The blueprint of salvation. The Creator's instructions came to Noah with crystal clarity. Precise as a master builder's plans for yourself an ark of cypress wood, the voice said. Make rooms in it and coat it with pitch inside and out. No boat had ever been built to these plans before. Not a sailing vessel, but a floating house, not meant to go anywhere but simply to stay afloat. The dimensions were given in cubits, a measure from elbow to fingertip, 300 cubits long, 50 cubits wide. 30 cubits high, came the command, a vessel so vast that those who would later see it being built would laugh at its size as much as its purpose. What need for a boat in a land far from any sea large enough to sail on? What need for a craft that could never be moved to water? They did not know that the water would come to it. Make a roof for it, the instructions continued, leaving below the roof an opening 1 cubit high all around. This would let in light and air while keeping out the rain that would fall without stopping. Put a door in the side of the ark and make lower, middle, and upper decks, 3 floors of rooms. Like a great floating town to house all that would be saved from the drowning world. Noah drew the plans in the dirt first, trying to grasp the scale of what he was being asked to build. His sons gathered around, their faces showing doubt, then wonder, then fear, as they began to understand. This was no small task. This would take years. This would take more wood than they had ever worked with, more pitch than they could easily gather, more strength than their arms alone could provide. We'll need help, Shem said, looking at the vast outline his father had drawn. Who will help? Ham asked. When they hear why we're building it. Noah looked at his hands, workers' hands, strong but aging. Then he looked at his sons. We begin with what we have, he said simply. If help comes, we will welcome it. If not, we will do what must be done. That night, as his family slept, Noah walked alone under the stars and spoke his fears aloud. I am old, he told the silent sky. This task is huge. I don't know if I have the strength or the time. The wind stirred cool against his face, and he felt a peace settle over him like a blanket. Not by your strength alone, seemed to whisper in that breeze. I will be with you. The next day, they began by marking out the ground where the ark would stand, 300 paces long, 50 wide, a footprint larger than any building they had ever seen. They drove stakes into the ground at each corner, then stepped back to take in the scale. It seemed impossible, yet they had been commanded, and they would obey. Trees had to be felled, hundreds of them. The sound of axes rang through the hills. Day after day, the cypress trees fell with sighs like final breaths. Their straight trunks, perfect for the task at hand, each were stripped of branches, cut to length, shaped with adzes until the rough bark became smooth planking. Word spread quickly of the strange project underway on Noah's land. At first, a few came just to look, to shake their heads, to walk away laughing. Then more came, drawn by tales of the old man's madness. Some stayed to mock, calling out questions meant to wound. "Where's the water coming from, old man?" they would shout, planning to drag this monster to the sea. Their laughter echoed across the growing framework. Noah rarely answered these taunts. He worked steadily, teaching his sons the skills they needed. How to square a beam, how to join wood so tightly water could not pass, how to boil pitch until it was just right for ceiling seams. When he did speak to the mockers, his words were simple. "A flood is coming. You too could build safety." The blueprint called for rooms, many rooms of different sizes. Some would house Noah's family. Others would house animals, from the smallest insects to creatures as large as cattle. Food stores would fill many spaces, fresh water in clay jars would line other walls. Everything needed for months of drift had to be planned for, prepared, placed just so for balance and access. As the frame took shape, rising higher than the tallest nearby trees, even the mockers grew quiet at times, stunned by the sheer scale of the work. Some still laughed, but their laughter held an edge of unease now. What if the old man was right? No, impossible. No flood could cover the world. No rain could last that long. They pushed away such thoughts and returned to their normal lives. Pitch was needed in great amounts, sticky black resin that would keep water out. It had to be gathered from certain trees, boiled to the right thickness, then carefully applied to every surface inside and out. The smell was strong, clinging to clothes and hair, but no one knew their lives would depend on this dark coating doing its job. Years passed. The ark took shape, beam by beam, plank by plank. What had seemed impossible slowly became real under patient hands, guided by faith. The lower deck was finished first, then the middle, then the upper. Rooms were divided by wooden walls. Roof was crafted with its cubit-high opening all around. A single door was built into one side, large enough for the tallest animals to enter. Throughout the long building, the skies remained normal, sometimes clear, sometimes cloudy, with gentle rain that soon passed. Nothing hinted at the deluge to come. Only Noah, guided by the voice that had never led him wrong, continued to build against a disaster no one else could see coming. The blueprint was followed exactly, each measurement precise, each join firm, each detail as commanded. And as the ark neared completion, Noah felt both relief and dread, relief that they had managed this enormous task, dread for what must come next. For the ark was not an end in itself, but a beginning, the cradle of a new world that could only be born after the old one died. Noah's reluctance and resolve, some nights, when the work was done for the day and his body ached from the labor, Noah would lie awake with doubts gnawing at his mind. Was he truly hearing the Creator's voice? Could any flood really cover all the land? Was he leading his family on a fool's quest, based on dreams and fears? The weight of what he claimed, that the world would drown, that only they would live, pressed on him like a stone. His wife noticed these moments of doubt. One evening, as they sat outside their home, watching the stars appear, she took his rough hand in hers. "What troubles you?" she asked, though she knew the answer well enough. I've asked them to give up their lives for this, Noah said, looking toward where his sons were resting after the day's work. Years spent building what others mock. What if I'm wrong? And what if you're right? She answered. You've never led us astray before. Your heart has always known true from false. Rest in that truth now. Such moments of weakness would pass. Burned away like morning mist by the sun of Noah's faith. He had walked with the Creator too long to doubt the voice he knew so well. When resolve returned, it came stronger than before, like metal tempered by fire. The mockery grew worse as the ark took shape. What had started as gentle teasing from neighbors had become bitter scorn from crowds who traveled far to see the mad boat on dry land. They would gather to watch the family work, calling out cruel jokes, throwing stones sometimes when anger overtook their amusement. Noah the boat builder, far from any sea. How many animals in your dreams these days, old man? When's this flood coming? We're dying of thirst waiting. Their laughter cut deep, not because Noah cared what they thought of him, but because each mocker was someone who would not heed the warning. Each laughing face would soon be gone forever. Each voice raised in jest would soon cry out in terror, then fall silent beneath the rising waters. Noah tried to warn them. In the early years of building, he would stop his work sometimes to speak to the crowds. A flood is coming, he would tell them, his voice calm but urgent. The Creator has shown me. There's still time to prepare. Save yourselves. Some would listen for a moment before turning away with rolled eyes. Others would shout him down with curses. A few young men once built a small mock ark nearby and pretended to sail it, bowing to Noah in false worship, laughing until tears ran down their faces. Noah watched them with sadness, then returned to his real work. As years passed, Noah spoke less to the crowds. The warnings had been given. Those who would hear had heard. Those who would mock had mocked. Now all that mattered was finishing the ark before time ran out. His hands grew more calloused, his beard whiter, but his eyes remained clear with purpose. His sons sometimes struggled more than he did with the scorn. They were younger, with pride more easily wounded. Ham especially would grow red-faced at the taunts, his hands tightening on his tools as if he might use them as weapons. "Why do you let them speak to you that way, Father?" he asked once, after a particularly cruel group had finally left. "Their words can't stop the rain from coming," Noah answered. "Better to use our breath for work than for argument." Shem, the oldest son, was more like his father, steady, thoughtful, able to focus on the task despite distractions. Japheth fell somewhere between his brothers, sometimes bothered by the mockery, sometimes able to let it wash over him like water off the ark's pitched sides. The wives of Noah's sons brought their own struggles to the work. They had married into this family not knowing what it would mean, years of hard labor, social isolation, becoming figures of public ridicule. Yet they stayed, worked alongside their husbands, trusted their father-in-law's vision, even when it seemed impossible. One day, as the ark neared completion, a group of young women came to watch the work. Among them was a girl Ham had once hoped to marry, before the ark building began. She had chosen another when it became clear Ham's family had embarked on a path of madness. Now she stood with the others, her child on her hip, and called out to Ham, "Still building your father's dream? My husband says you'll die, old men waiting for this flood." The others laughed, but there was pity in some of their eyes, pity for the wasted years, the wasted strength. Ham said nothing, though his jaw clenched tight. That night he spoke to Noah. "Will it really come, Father? The flood? Sometimes I wonder if we've thrown our lives away on this." Noah put his hand on his son's shoulder. "I wonder too sometimes," he admitted. "But then I remember who asked us to build. Not a man who might be wrong, the Creator, who sees all, knows all, made all. Trust in that, my son, not in my strength or wisdom." As the final planks were fitted, the last pitch applied, Noah felt both triumph and terror. The ark was ready. Now came the hardest part, waiting for the end of the world as they knew it. Waiting to see if his reluctant faith, his hard-won resolve, would prove justified or foolish. The sky remained calm. The earth continued its cycles. People continued to live as they always had. Only Noah and his family waited, for change, for destruction, for salvation. Their resolve would soon be tested beyond anything they had yet faced. The first boards and beams. The first tree fell with a crack that echoed through the hills. Noah stood watching as the tall cypress swayed, then leaned, then rushed toward the ground. The impact shook the earth beneath his feet. Shem and Ham, who had worked the saw between them, stepped back from the fallen giant, wiping sweat from their brows. Japheth was already marking the next tree to fall. That first timber marked the true beginning. Plans had been drawn. Ground had been cleared. But this was the first piece of what would become their salvation. Noah ran his hand along the rough bark. "Good straight grain," he said. "This will make a strong beam for the frame." The work of turning trees into usable lumber was slow and hard. After felling, each trunk had to be stripped of branches. Then came the splitting, metal wedges driven into the wood with heavy mallets, forcing the fibers apart along the grain. The sound of mallet striking wedges became a rhythm that filled their days, a heartbeat of creation. Rough planks were shaped with adzes, curved blades on long handles that peeled away slivers of wood with each swing. Hour after hour, day after day, the men worked these tools, transforming lumpy logs into smooth, straight boards. Their arms grew stronger, their aim more sure, their bodies learning the wisdom of efficient movement. The first beams formed the keel, the spine of the ark, upon which all else would rest. These had to be the strongest pieces, joined with perfect care. Noah showed his sons how to cut notches that would lock the timbers together, how to drill holes for wooden pegs that would hold the joints firm even when stressed by shifting weight or bucking waves. "Not like that," Noah would say sometimes, guiding his sons' hands to a better angle. "Like this. Feel how the wood wants to be cut. Work with its nature, not against it." These were lessons passed down through generations, from father to son, master to apprentice, the ancient craft of woodworking refined through centuries of practice. As the pile of finished lumber grew, they began to assemble the framework. Vertical posts rose from the keel, spaced evenly along its length. Cross beams connected these posts, creating a grid work that would eventually support the outer skin of the ark. Each joint was test-fitted, adjusted if needed, then pegged firmly in place. The scale of their work became clearer as the frame took shape. 300 cubits stretched farther than the eye could easily take in at once, 50 cubits wide created a vast interior space. And as the vertical posts reached upward toward their full 30-cubit height, even Noah had moments of awe at what they were building. "It's so big," Japheth said one day, standing back to look at their progress. "Could the flood really rise higher than this?" "The Creator said to build it this high," Noah replied. "So yes, the waters will rise higher still." Rain came sometimes while they worked, normal rain that lasted hours at most, then moved on. They would shelter under finished sections of the frame, watching water beat on the wood, running their fingers along the grain that had once carried sap through living trees. These gentle showers gave no hint of what was to come. Animals watched them work from the edges of the clearing. Deer pausing in their grazing, foxes sitting alert on nearby rocks, birds circling overhead as if curious about this strange new thing taking shape. Noah would look up sometimes to meet the gaze of a wolf or bear, feeling an odd connection, as if these creatures somehow sensed they were building something meant partly for them. Year turned to year, sun and moon traced their paths across the sky hundreds of times as the work continued. The men's hands grew more callous, their skin darkened by exposure, their muscles hardened by constant effort. Yet still they worked, day after day, the ark slowly taking form around them. The lower deck was the first to be fully framed. Its floor laid with thick planks, spaces marked out for different rooms and pens. Noah walked across it when it was done, feeling the solid strength beneath his feet. This would hold the largest animals, cattle, horses, perhaps even creatures he had only heard described by travelers from distant lands. The middle deck came next. Another vast expanse of wooden flooring, supported by strong posts rising from below. Here would be space for smaller animals, and for food stores, grains and dried fruits, fat, honey, and seeds, enough to last many months. Up top, Noah's family and the smallest creatures, birds, insects, lizards, mice. Windows built into the sides would let in light and air. This would be their home while the world below drowned and was reborn. As the frame neared completion, they began the work of enclosing it. Planks were fitted edge to edge along the outer frame, each one sealed to its neighbors with pitch to keep out water. The rich, sticky smell of pitch filled the air as they worked, coating their hands and clothes with black residue that never quite washed away. The door was built last, a single opening in one side of the ark, large enough for the tallest animals to enter. Heavy timbers framed this portal between death and life. Noah himself shaped the door panel, fitting it precisely to its frame, adding crossbars for strength. This door, once closed, would seal them in, and seal the drowning world out. Through years of work, through changing seasons, through mockery and doubt, the family had persevered, board by board, beam by beam. They had built what the Creator commanded. Not yet complete, but taking clear shape now, a vessel like none ever seen before, a wooden world waiting for its moment of purpose. The taste of sawdust, the smell of fresh-cut wood and boiling pitch, the feel of grain under calloused fingers, these became the constants of their lives. And through it all, Noah kept his eyes on both the work at hand and the horizon, where clouds would one day gather to change everything forever. Ridicule and rejection. The first visitors came out of curiosity. Word had spread through nearby towns of the strange project underway, an enormous boat being built far from any water. People walked for hours just to see if the stories were true. They would stand at the edge of the clearing, watching silently as Noah and his family worked, then walk away, shaking their heads in wonder. Soon the silent watchers gave way to vocal critics. A group of young men from the nearest town made it a regular sport to visit the building site and call out mockery. They would bring wine, sit on comfortable rocks with a clear view, and spend hours laughing at what they saw as an old man's madness. "Noah, how many more trees will you kill for your dream boat?" one would call. "Are you planning to grow fins as well, fish man?" Another would add, sending his friends into fits of laughter. Noah rarely responded. He would glance their way sometimes, nod in acknowledgement, then return to his work. His silence often frustrated them more than any argument could have. They wanted reaction, wanted to see him angry or defeated. His calm persistence denied them this pleasure. Not all visitors came to mock. Some were genuinely curious, approaching Noah respectfully to ask about his unusual undertaking. "Why build something so large?" they would ask. "What is this for?" To these, Noah would explain patiently. "A flood is coming," he would say. "Water will cover all the land. The Creator has warned me, told me to build this ark to save my family and the animals." He would invite these listeners to prepare themselves, to turn from wrong ways, to build their own protection. Most would listen politely, thank him for the explanation, then leave with backward glances tinged with pity. A few laughed openly at what they saw as the ramblings of a sun-touched old man. Almost none heeded his warning. The concept of a world-covering flood was too far beyond their experience to seem possible. The rejection cut deeper when it came from those Noah had known for years. Old friends stopped visiting. Trading partners found reasons to do business elsewhere. People who had once greeted him warmly in town now crossed to the other side of the path when they saw him coming. Noah the boat builder. They would whisper behind their hands. Lost his wits in his old age. Shame about his sons following him into madness. The poor wives trapped in that family of fools. These whispers reached Noah's ears, carried by the few who still spoke to him honestly. He accepted them with the same calm that met direct mockery, though they stung more sharply. These were people who had broken bread with him, whose children had played with his, who had sought his advice in earlier days. His family felt the rejection keenly. Ham's wife had been popular in town, known for her skill at weaving. Now former friends turned away when she appeared at the market. Shem's children were pushed aside by others at the well. Told their grandfather was crazy and they would be too one day. Japheth, who had once played music at town gatherings, found his presence no longer welcome. Why must we bear this? Ham asked one evening, as they sat tired from the day's labor. We could build elsewhere, away from their eyes and words. Where we build matters less than that we build, Noah answered. And perhaps some will see and believe before it's too late. None did believe, at least not enough to act. A few would sometimes help with small tasks, bringing water to the thirsty workers, offering a basket of bread, lending tools for a day. But none joined fully in the work or started preparations of their own. The ridicule kept many away who might otherwise have listened. The worst mockery came when animals began to approach the ark. It started with birds, pairs of doves, ravens, eagles, settling near the work site as if waiting. Then came smaller ground creatures, rabbits, foxes, badgers, who seemed to lose their fear of humans. Walking calmly into the cleared area around the ark. A wealthy merchant happened to be visiting, considering whether to sell Noah more pitch. When a pair of leopards emerged from the forest and walked directly to the ark's entrance. The big cats ignored the humans completely, sitting down as if waiting for the door to open. The merchant left immediately, spreading word of Noah's witchcraft that could call wild beasts. He's not just mad, he's dangerous. The story grew, he commands wild animals. Keep your children away. New faces appeared among the mockers, priests from the temples in larger towns, come to see this threat to proper worship. They watched with narrow eyes as Noah worked. Noting how animals approached, how the family continued building despite all reason, saying they should stop. This man claims to hear the voice of the Creator, one priest told the gathered crowd. He speaks against our ways, threatens doom if we don't follow his path. Such talk is forbidden. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the listeners. That night, someone set fire to a stack of prepared lumber at the edge of the work area. Japheth spotted the flames and raised the alarm. The family worked together to douse the fire before it could spread to the ark itself. In the morning, footprints showed several men had come and gone in the night. Noah gathered his family. From now on, someone must watch through the night, he said. The time grows short, and fear makes people dangerous. The ridicule had turned to something darker, hatred born of fear. People feared what they couldn't understand, feared a message that said their comfortable world would end, feared a man who walked a different path. That fear found outlet in rejection. In active attempts to stop what Noah had started. Through it all, Noah continued building, each plank laid, each seam sealed. Brought them closer to completion and closer to the day when ridicule would turn to desperate pleas, when rejection would become longing for acceptance. When the door would close between those who had heeded the warning and those who had mocked it. The weight of knowing what was coming sometimes bent Noah's shoulders more than any wooden beam ever could. To build in the face of scorn was hard. To build knowing that scorn would turn to terror was harder still. Yet he built on, day after day, his hands shaping wood while his heart carried the burden of a truth no one wanted to hear. Gathering the animals, the first sign. The morning began like any other, dew on the grass, birds singing their dawn songs, the family rising to continue their work on the nearly completed ark. But as Noah stepped outside his tent, he noticed something strange. A pair of deer stood at the edge of the clearing, watching him with unblinking eyes. As he met their gaze, they began walking toward him, with purpose in their steps. Behind them came more animals, wolves walking beside rabbits, foxes beside chickens, each moving in pairs, male and female. None showed fear of humans or of each other. None chased or fled. They moved as if drawn by an unseen hand, approaching the ark in orderly fashion. Noah stood motionless as the procession continued. More animals emerged from the forest edges, great bears lumbering alongside small foxes, eagles soaring above with smaller birds. The natural order seemed suspended. Predator and prey moving as neighbors rather than enemies. "Father!" Japheth called, running from his tent. "Look!" He pointed toward the eastern hills, where larger shapes were appearing, pairs of antelope, wild cattle, even creatures rarely seen in these parts. "It has begun," Noah said quietly. "The gathering has begun." By midday, the clearing around the ark teemed with waiting animals. They formed loose groups by kind, birds together, hoofed animals together, scaled creatures together, all waiting patiently. As if they understood what was happening better than most humans did. The word spread quickly. People rushed from nearby settlements to witness the strange sight. They stood at a safe distance, pointing, whispering, some laughing nervously, others silent with wonder or fear. Never had anyone seen such a gathering. But never had they seen natural enemies standing peacefully side by side. "How is he doing this?" a town elder asked, his voice carrying across the clearing to where Noah worked, fitting the last pieces of the gangplank that would lead into the ark. Noah looked up, meeting the man's eyes. "I'm not doing this," he answered simply. "The Creator who made them is calling them, the same Creator who warned of the flood." For the first time, doubt flickered across some faces in the crowd. The animals were real enough, their behavior impossible to explain by normal means. If this part of Noah's story was proving true before their eyes, what about the rest? A wealthy merchant pushed to the front of the onlookers. "I'll buy them from you, Noah," he called out. "Name your price for this collection, such rare beasts would make me richer still." Noah shook his head without pausing in his work. "They aren't mine to sell. They've been sent for saving, not for profit." As evening approached, Noah's sons began guiding the first animals into the ark. The creatures followed willingly, climbing the wooden ramp in pairs, finding their way to spaces prepared for them. Birds flew to perches in the upper deck. Smaller mammals scurried to nests of straw in their assigned sections. Larger beasts settled in stalls on the lower deck. Through the night, they came, nocturnal creatures appearing from shadows, desert animals arriving from distant dry lands. Even insects flying or crawling in matched pairs. Noah and his family worked tirelessly, guiding each to its place, ensuring fresh water was available, checking that predators were separated from prey by sturdy wooden walls. The next morning brought creatures from rivers and streams, otter, beavers, turtles, making their slow way up the ramp. Behind them came animals rarely seen by human eyes, strange spotted cats from far mountains, horned beasts from distant plains, tiny creatures that seemed half bird and half mouse. "How will we feed them all?" Ham's wife asked, overwhelmed by the number and variety now filling the ark. "The Creator who sent them knows their needs," Noah assured her. "Some will sleep through much of our journey, others will eat little. We have stored what we can, and it will be enough." By the third day of gathering, the more unusual creatures began to arrive, animals Noah had only heard described by travelers from far lands, tall beasts with necks longer than 3 men standing on each other's shoulders. Massive gray animals with noses like snakes, striped horses that weren't quite horses. Each came in a male and female pair. Each moved with purpose toward the ark. The crowds of human watchers grew larger each day. What had started as local curiosity had become a regional sensation. People traveled for days to witness the gathering, bringing families, setting up temporary camps on surrounding hills. Some still mocked, still laughed, but their voices held less conviction now. Something extraordinary was happening, something beyond human planning or control. Noah, a voice called from the crowd as the seventh day of gathering began. A priest from the largest temple in the region stood with arms raised. This is powerful magic you work. Share its secrets with us, and you will be made chief among priests. No magic. Noah replied, not slowing his work of guiding a pair of leopards up the ramp. Only obedience to the Creator's command. You could still build your own protection. There's still time, though not much. Some in the crowd exchanged troubled glances. A few slipped away, perhaps to consider Noah's words. Most stayed to watch. Caught between disbelief in the flood and the undeniable evidence before their eyes that something beyond normal was occurring. On the eighth day, creatures of the deep edges of the sea began to arrive: seals, sea lions, otter who spent most of their lives in saltwater. They moved awkwardly on land, but made their determined way to the ark like all the others. Noah had prepared pools of water for these animals, lined with pitch to hold the moisture they would need. By the 10th day, the stream of arriving animals had slowed to a trickle. The ark was nearly full. The sounds of countless creatures filled the air around it: roars, chirps, hisses. Calls of every kind blending into a strange music unlike anything heard since creation's dawn. Noah stood at the top of the ramp, looking out over the land that would soon vanish beneath water. The gathering of the animals had been the first undeniable sign that everything he had been told was coming to pass. The mockery had quieted somewhat, replaced by uneasy watching. Yet still no one had joined their work. Still no one had built their own ark. "The door will close soon," he said to those close enough to hear. The Creator has been patient, but that patience has its limit. As the last pair of small flying insects spiraled up the ramp, Noah felt a deep sadness mixed with wonder. The gathering had been miraculous, every kind of creature coming as called, finding its place in the wooden world he had built. Yet this miracle was the prelude to catastrophe for all left outside. The sky remained clear. The sun warm on upturned faces. No visible sign yet warned of water to come. But the animals knew. Their extraordinary behavior spoke louder than any human words could. Something was coming. Something that made natural enemies set aside their nature and seek the safety of the ark. Noah gave thanks that evening, for the gathered animals, for their safe arrival, for the sign they represented. Tomorrow would bring the final preparations. Soon after, the rain would begin. And once it started, it would not stop until the world they knew had vanished beneath the waves. Provisioning the ark, the final preparations. With the animals settled in their places, the urgent work of provisioning began. The ark's vast middle deck stood ready, lined with storage bins, clay jars, woven baskets, and hanging nets. Now these empty spaces needed to be filled with enough food and water to sustain life through long months adrift. Every creature according to its kind, Noah reminded his family as they worked. The Creator made each with different needs. We must provide for them all. For grass-eating animals, they had spent months harvesting and drying hay, filling entire rooms with sweet-smelling fodder. Shem oversaw this work carefully, calculating how much each creature would need per day, multiplying by the months they might be afloat. More, Noah would say when shown the stores. Then more again. Better to have excess than shortage. For meat eaters, the problem was harder. Ham suggested dried fish and meat preserved with salt and herbs. The large cats eat much. He noted with concern. How will we store enough? Noah nodded thoughtfully. The Creator who sent them here will provide. Some may sleep more than they would on land. Others may eat less. We'll store what we can, and trust what we can't. Water posed the greatest challenge. Even with rainfall, they would need vast quantities stored from the start. Adak. Japheth had devised a system of gutters along the roof opening to channel rain into large cisterns, but these would begin empty. Every available jar, skin, and barrel had been filled from nearby springs and streams, carried bucket by bucket up the ramp. The women oversaw food for the family, dried fruits, nuts, honey preserved in wax-sealed pots, grains in sealed bins to protect from moisture and pests. Seeds of many kinds were stored, both for food and for eventual planting in whatever world emerged from the waters. Will plants survive? Japheth's wife asked as she packed away carefully labeled seed pouches. Will anything remain to grow in? The Creator promised new life after the flood, Noah assured her. The waters will reseed. The earth will bloom again. These seeds will find soil. Tools were gathered and stored, axes and saws for working wood, needles and thread for mending, knives for cutting food and rope, oil lamps and wicks, flints for striking fire, extra vessels for cooking and carrying. Each item was chosen with care. Each stored in its proper place. Remember where everything is placed, Noah told his family. In the days to come, finding what we need quickly may matter greatly. As they worked, crowds of onlookers continued to grow. Word had spread far beyond nearby towns. People traveled great distances to see the ark and its gathered animals. Some still came to mock, but many now watched in silent wonder, uncertain what to make of what they saw. A group of elders from a distant city approached Noah on the 5th day of provisioning. "We have seen the animals come," their leader said. "We have heard your warnings. Tell us truly, how soon will this flood come?" Noah paused in his work of securing a large water barrel. 7 days from today, the rains will begin. If you believe now, there may still be time to build some refuge, to gather your families to higher ground. The elders looked at each other, doubt and fear mixing in their expressions. "No rain could rise as high as you claim," one said, though with less certainty than such statements had once held. "Yet these animals, it is strange indeed." "Strange now," Noah replied. "Soon it will be clear. Choose wisely in the days you have left." He returned to his work, leaving them to discuss among themselves. They left without commitment, glancing back often at the towering wooden structure. As the final day of preparations arrived, the sky remained clear and blue. No hint of the coming deluge showed in distant clouds. Birds still sang in nearby trees. The sun still warmed the earth. Only the ark and its gathered occupants suggested anything unusual. Noah walked through each deck one final time, checking every pen, every storage area, every securing rope and brace. The animals watched him pass with calm eyes, settled now into their temporary home. Some of the larger creatures, elephants, rhinoceroses, giant cattle, had been guided to spaces with reinforced floors and walls. Birds occupied perches in the highest areas, their calls creating a constant chorus. The family gathered that evening outside the ark for a final meal under the open sky. They sat in silence for some time, each lost in thought, each aware of what tomorrow would bring. The enormity of what they were about to experience weighed heavily on all. "I'm afraid," Ham's youngest child finally said, giving voice to what all felt. Noah drew the child close. "Fear is natural when facing the unknown," he said gently. "But remember, we don't face it alone. The Creator who warned us, who guided the building, who sent the animals, that same Creator will be with us on the waters." As darkness fell, Noah stood and raised his hands in prayer. "We have done what was commanded," he said. "We have built according to your design. We have gathered what was sent. Now we place ourselves in your hands, through whatever comes." The stars appeared one by one above them. The same stars that had shone down on countless generations before, that would continue to shine when all watching eyes had closed. The night air was sweet with the scent of flowers that would soon vanish beneath the flood. Tomorrow, they would enter the ark. Tomorrow. The door would close between them and the world they had always known. The final provisions were stored, the final checks complete. All that remained was to step from the old world into the vessel of the new, to leave behind all that could not be saved. Noah looked at his family's faces in the firelight, his faithful wife, his 3 sons, their wives, his grandchildren. They had worked alongside him through years of labor and mockery. They had trusted when trust seemed foolish. Now, they would journey with him into an unknown future, while the only world they had ever known drowned behind them. The weight of responsibility pressed upon him, for these lives. For the creatures in the ark, for the remnant of creation that would rebuild after the waters receded. Yet with that weight came certainty, they had been chosen for this task. They had been prepared. They would carry the flame of life through the flood, to light a new beginning. Rest well, Noah told his family as they prepared for sleep. Tomorrow begins a journey unlike any taken before. The last day on dry land dawned. It broke golden over the eastern hills, painting the ark's wooden sides with warm light. Dew sparkled on grass that would soon lie fathoms deep beneath raging waters. Birds sang their morning songs, unaware that this chorus would be their last on land for many months. Noah rose before the others, as was his habit. He walked a short distance from the family tents and stood facing the ark, this massive vessel that had consumed years of their lives, that had brought mockery and isolation. That would soon become their entire world. Its sheer size still astonished him sometimes. "Is there anything I've forgotten?" he whispered, running through mental lists of provisions, tools, tasks completed. "Have I done all you asked?" No voice answered, but a sense of peace settled over him, the quiet certainty that had guided him through years of building. They were ready. All that was commanded had been done. As his family woke and began preparing their final meal on dry land, a strange quietness fell over the surrounding countryside. The usual distant sounds of town life, hammers, voices, animal calls, seemed muted. Even the wind held its breath. The world waited, poised between what was and what would be. Noah gathered his family. "Today we enter the ark," he said simply. "Take nothing more than what you carry in your hands. All we need is already inside." They ate without speaking much, each absorbed in private thoughts. Each saying silent goodbyes to the world they had known. The children seemed to sense the solemnity of the moment, playing quietly nearby rather than running and shouting as usual. As they finished their meal, movement caught Noah's eye. People were coming, not just the usual crowd of curious onlookers, but a great mass of humanity flowing toward the ark from all directions. Word had spread far and wide of the animal gathering. Now, it seemed everyone within traveling distance had come for this final day. They formed a vast semicircle around the ark, thousands strong, standing in family groups. Some pointing, some laughing, some watching in solemn silence. Richly dressed merchants stood beside simple farmers. City dwellers with soft hands stood next to hunters with weather-beaten faces. All of humanity seemed represented in this gathering. A murmur ran through the crowd as Noah and his family began dismantling their tents for the last time. They worked methodically, folding materials that might be useful inside the ark, discarding what was not needed. The crowd watched every movement, every gesture. From the front of the assembled people, a man stepped forward, gray-bearded, richly dressed, leaning on a staff of office. Noah recognized him as a leader from the largest nearby city. "Noah," the elder called, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet crowd. "Many have come to see this wonder you have built, to see these animals gathered against nature's ways. Some still mock. Others are not so certain." He paused, looking around at the sea of faces. "What would you say to us on this last day?" if your warnings prove true. Noah sat down the tent pole he had been carrying and faced the crowd. For years, he had warned, had invited, had endured their scorn. Now, at the end, what words remained? "The door stands open still," he said, his voice strong despite his years. "The Creator who sent the animals would welcome you as well. There is room." A ripple passed through the crowd, shifting feet, exchanged glances, whispered consultations. For a moment, it seemed some might step forward, might accept this final invitation. Then a laugh broke out somewhere in the back ranks. Another joined it. Soon, portions of the crowd were laughing openly. "Room for all of us in your wooden box," someone called mockingly. "We'd be packed tighter than your animals." "The old man thinks we'll drown on dry land," another voice added. Yet not everyone laughed. Some looked at the clear sky with new unease. Some studied the impossibly ordered ranks of animals visible through the ark's door. Some stepped back from the louder mockers, creating distance, as if from a contagion. Noah turned away from the crowd. There was nothing more to say. The invitation had been given one final time. Those who would hear had heard. Those who would mock had mocked. Now only the rain would convince them, and by then, it would be too late. As midday approached, Noah led his family up the gangplank into the ark. They walked slowly, absorbing final glimpses of the world, sunlight on leaves, the distant line of hills, clouds drifting in deep blue sky, ordinary sights that would soon exist only in memory. The animals inside grew restless as the family entered, sensing the approaching change. Soft growls, stamping hooves, rustling wings created a background music to this solemn procession. The crowd watched in silence now, the mockery fading as the reality of Noah's conviction impressed itself upon them. Whatever they believed about the coming flood, there was no denying the old man truly believed he was walking away from everything, sealing himself in a wooden vessel based on absolute faith in what he had been told. As the last family member crossed the threshold, Noah turned to face the world one final time. His eyes swept across the assembled crowd, across the trees and hills beyond, across the sky where no rain clouds yet gathered. His heart ached for what would be lost, for those who had refused to listen. "The door remains open," he called out, "until the Creator closes it." He waited there, framed in the doorway, as the sun passed its zenith and began its descent toward evening. The crowd remained as well, watching, waiting. Some perhaps still debating internally whether to heed this final warning. As the shadows lengthened, a change came over the air, nothing visible, no clouds, no darkening, but a heaviness, a tension. Like the moment before lightning strikes. Animals in the ark grew more restless. Birds called more urgently. A tremor passed through the earth, so slight, many might have missed it. Noah felt it. He knew what it meant. "The time has come," he said, his voice carrying despite its quietness. "May the Creator have mercy on you all." He stepped back from the doorway. Before the eyes of the astonished crowd, the massive door began to move. No human hands touched it, yet it swung slowly inward, the heavy timbers moving as if weightless. With a final, solid sound, it met the frame and sealed tight. Collective gasp rose from the crowd. Whatever they had believed or disbelieved about Noah's warnings, this was beyond explanation. Fear replaced mockery on many faces. Some began to back away from the ark, as if distance might protect them from whatever power had moved that door. Inside, Noah's family gathered around him in the dimness. Light filtered through the narrow openings near the roof, casting long shadows across wooden floors. The sounds of the animals surrounded them, life in all its forms, preserved within these walls, while death approached outside. "Now we wait," Noah said quietly. "The Creator has sealed us in. The Creator will protect us through what comes outside." As evening approached, the first faint stirrings of unusual wind began to touch the treetops. The first subtle change in air pressure made ears pop. The first distant rumble of thunder sounded from beyond the horizon. So began the last night of the world that was, on the eve of the deluge that would transform all. The first raindrop. The sky hung low that morning. Birds fell quiet in their nests. Streams slowed to a trickle. A stillness crept across the land unlike any Noah had known. He stood on the ark's roof, watching the clouds gather, not white and fluffy, but dark and heavy with the weight of what was to come. His sons worked below, settling the last of the animals. Their footsteps echoed through wooden halls that smelled of fresh pitch and hay. The world outside had mocked them for years. Now, as the breeze died and the air grew thick, their laughter had faded to whispers. The first drop fell on Noah's weathered hand, small, almost gentle. A tiny splash of cool against his skin. He closed his eyes and felt its touch, knowing what it meant, not just rain, but the start of something that would reshape everything. More drops followed. Soft taps on the wooden deck, quiet splashes in the dust. The rhythm began slowly, like the heartbeat of a sleeping child. No storm or thunder yet, just the steady pattering. Stronger with each passing moment. Noah climbed down the ladder to find his family. His wife looked up as he entered, her eyes asking the question her lips wouldn't form. He nodded once. She set down her basket and called to her daughters-in-law. Time had come. The rain fell harder now, no longer gentle kisses from the sky, but a steady drumming. The ground, dry for so long, couldn't soak it up fast enough. Puddles formed in the footprints around the ark. Small rivulets began to carve paths through the dirt. Noah's family gathered at the great door. They peered out at the world they were leaving behind. Homes dotted the hills. Markets stood empty as people rushed to find shelter from what they thought was merely a storm. Some stopped to point at the dark clouds, faces tilted skyward in wonder. They had never seen such rain. The wooden door creaked as God sealed it shut, not by Noah's hand, but by divine will. The click of the latch felt final. The outside world became distant, heard, but no longer seen. The rain's rhythm grew louder on the roof. Inside, the ark smelled of wood and life. Animals settled into their pens, somehow sensing the journey ahead. The humans huddled together in their living space, listening. The rain no longer fell in drops but sheets. Water streamed down the outside walls. The sound swelled until it filled every corner. Noah lit a lamp as darkness fell early that day. Shadows danced across faces marked with worry and wonder. No one spoke much. What could be said? They had prepared for this moment through decades of work and ridicule. Now it had come, and words seemed small against the growing roar of water. Panic and chaos. By morning, the world had changed. The ark no longer rested on solid ground, but bobbed gently. At first, the movement was slight, a subtle shifting beneath their feet. Noah's grandsons pointed and whispered as water began to seep under the door, not enough to threaten, but enough to show that the earth outside had vanished beneath a rising tide. Villages in the valleys flooded first. People waded through knee-deep waters, clutching children and belongings. They climbed to higher ground, certain the rain would stop. It did not. Hour after hour, the downpour continued without pause or mercy. The ark lifted free from its cradle of earth. Years of building now tested in its true purpose. The massive hull groaned and creaked, but held firm against the waters. Inside, animals stirred uneasily at the new motion. Noah and his sons walked the decks, checking ropes and cages, speaking calm words to frightened creatures. Outside, panic spread like fire. Those who had laughed now pounded on the ark's sides, their voices barely heard above the storm. Some tried to build rafts from broken homes. Others climbed trees and hills, watching the water chase them higher. The ark drifted now, turning slowly in the current. from small windows high in the walls. Noah's family caught glimpses of a drowning world. Rooftops peaked above the flood. Trees stood like lonely islands. People clung to anything that floated by. By the third day, the mountains became the last refuge. Crowds huddled on slopes, watching the water climb toward them inch by inch. Some still called out to gods who did not answer. Others sat in silent shock. The rain continued, relentless and cold. Inside the ark, life settled into rhythm, feeding times, cleaning times, moments of prayer and rest. They tried not to listen to the cries that sometimes carried across the water. They tried not to think about friends and neighbors who had refused to believe. On the seventh day, the last mountain peak vanished beneath the flood. The world outside became nothing but water, stretching to every horizon. The rain still fell, rippling the surface of what had become an endless sea. The ark floated alone, carrying within its wooden walls the last breath of a world now gone. The world drowns. The old world died beneath waves that knew no shore. Forests that had stood for centuries now drifted as broken wood. Cities built by kings lay crushed under the weight of water. The works of human hands, their towers and markets, their fields and flocks, all washed away like footprints on sand. Inside the ark, Shem stood watch by a small window. "Nothing remains," he whispered to his father. "Not even the highest peaks." Noah placed a hand on his son's shoulder. They looked out at the gray expanse together, water below, water falling from above. The boundary between sea and sky almost invisible in the constant rain. Life that had once filled the land vanished. Birds that had not found the ark eventually tired of flight and fell. Fish from rivers died in the mix of salt and soil. Creatures that had roamed the plains now existed only as memory, or as precious pears in wooden pens. The ark held its course, though no one knew where it sailed. No landmarks remained to guide them. No stars shone through the cloud-dark sky. They drifted as God willed. Carried by currents they could not see, to a destination they could not imagine. Days blurred together, rain and darkness, the constant sound of water against wood. Noah's wife kept track by marking notches on a beam, 20 days, 30. The children asked when it would end. The adults had no answer but faith. The ark became a world unto itself. Each family had their space. The animals settled into the strange rhythm of their floating home. Some gave birth during those days, new life beginning, even as the old world ended. The newborns knew nothing but wooden walls and the gentle rocking of the flood. At night, Noah sometimes thought he heard voices carried on the wind, echoes of those lost. Or perhaps just the creaking of the ark. He would rise and walk the decks, checking ropes and walls, ensuring their vessel held firm. His sons often found him praying in the dark, his words mixing with the sound of rain. 40 days passed. 40 nights. Then, on a morning like any other, Noah noticed a change. The constant drumming on the roof had softened. The endless sheets of water thinned to streams, then to scattered drops. By midday, for the first time since it began, the rain stopped. The silence felt strange after so long. The family gathered, looking upward. Through a gap in the clouds, a single ray of light broke through, pale and weak, but sunlight nonetheless. No one spoke. They simply stood in its glow. Faces turned upward like flowers too long in shadow. But the world remained drowned. Though the rain had ceased, the waters still covered everything. The ark floated on an endless sea under clearing skies. The deluge had ended, but their journey was far from over. Now began the long wait for the waters to recede. Inside the ark, life inside the wooden world followed patterns set by need and light. Mornings began with feeding. Each animal had its place and portion, the clean beasts in their stalls, the birds in their roosts. Noah's sons knew each creature by sight and sound. They worked with quiet efficiency, moving through narrow passages with grain and greens. The middle deck housed the larger beasts. Their calls echoed through wooden chambers. The scent of hay and musk hung in the air. Ham's wife had a way with the animals. She spoke to them in low tones that seemed to calm even the most restless. Her hands moved gently over fur and feather, checking for signs of sickness or distress. The upper deck held their living space, simple rooms with beds of straw and wool. They ate together twice daily, dried fruits, nuts, grain ground to flour and mixed with water to make flatbread. They rationed carefully, never knowing how long the food must last. Water they collected from the rain through hatches in the roof. It tasted clean, washed of the earth's corruption. They stored it in clay jars sealed with pitch. Even surrounded by a world of water, they treated each drop as precious. Light came from small windows cut high in the walls and from oil lamps used sparingly. Days passed in dim golden glow, nights in deeper shadow. They learned to move by touch and memory through the ark's 3 floors, their hands finding familiar walls and ropes. Noah's grandchildren adjusted best to ark life. They made games of chores. They named the animals and whispered stories to them. They found joy in small discoveries, a bird's feather, an interestingly shaped knot in the wood. The changing patterns of light through the windows. The adults bore heavier burdens, memories of what was lost, worries about what might come. They worked until exhaustion brought sleep, fighting the thoughts that crept in during quiet moments. Had they done enough? Saved enough? Would the world ever be green again? Japheth kept a record, scratched on wooden tablets. Days passed. Supplies used, notable events. For those who come after, he explained when his brothers questioned. They should know what happened here, how the world ended and began again. The ark's constant motion became normal. The creaking of timbers, the gentle rocking with each wave, their bodies adapted to the sway, their steps unconsciously shifting with the motion. Even in sleep, they moved with the ark's rhythm, as much a part of it as the beams and planks. Time lost meaning without seasons or growing things to mark its passing. Only the cycle of light and dark remained constant, prayers at dawn, work through day, rest at dusk, stories and soft singing before sleep, then darkness, until morning brought the pattern again. The endless rain. For 40 days and 40 nights, the waters poured from broken skies. Not gentle rain that nurtures seeds, but torrents that reshaped the earth itself. Mountains crumbled under its force. Valleys filled until they vanished. The face of the world changed with each passing day. The ark rode the flood like a leaf on a stream, carried by currents stronger than any river known before. Sometimes the waters raged, tossing their wooden home on waves tall as the trees that once stood on vanished hills. The family huddled together during these storms, whispering prayers as the ark creaked and groaned around them. Noah's wife told stories during the worst nights, tales passed down from her grandmother's grandmother of the garden at the world's beginning. She spoke of rivers flowing with sweet water and trees bearing fruit in every season. Her words painted pictures of a world the younger ones had never seen, a world without violence or fear. "Will it be like that again?" the children asked. She touched their faces gently. "Perhaps not the same," she said, "but in its own way, God promises new beginnings." The endless rain shaped their dreams. They slept to its rhythm and woke to its sound. It became the heartbeat of their floating world, constant as breath. The youngest among them sometimes wondered if there had ever been anything else, if the stories of dry land and sun-warmed fields were just tales told to comfort them. Animals sensed the changing weather before humans could. They grew restless before storms and calm when gentler rains fell. Noah watched them closely, reading the world's moods in their behavior. When the birds grew quiet and the cattle lowed softly, he knew rough waters approached. Time stretched like shadows at dusk. Days melted into one another. marked only by the changing light that filtered through the clouds. Morning brought gray instead of darkness. Evening deepened to black. Between these shifts, they lived and worked and waited. Noah spent hours in prayer, sometimes alone, sometimes with his family gathered around him. Not for ourselves alone, he reminded them. We carry the future of all living things. This burden is also a blessing. His weathered hands, calloused from years of building, now folded in quiet supplication. The children made counting games of the raindrops. They pressed their ears to the wooden walls and closed their eyes, trying to single out one drop from the endless chorus. Listen, they told each other. That one's yours. That one's mine. They gave names to special sounds, the heavy splash, the gentle patter, the drumming rush. When the rain finally stopped, the silence felt like a physical presence. They moved through it carefully, as if it might shatter. For the first time in 40 days, they heard clearly the sounds of their ark-bound world, animal calls, footsteps on wooden planks. Voices no longer competing with the roar of water. The absence of rain became its own kind of music. Drifting on the abyss. The ark drifted upon endless waters, a tiny wooden world beneath an empty sky. No landmarks guided them, no shores waited in the distance, only water stretching to every horizon. Reflecting clouds and light in a mirror that wrapped around the world. Noah often stood on the upper deck, scanning the vast nothing that surrounded them. The flood had erased all boundaries. North, south, east, west, these words lost meaning when no fixed point remained. They floated in a limbo between the world that was and the world yet to be. The days grew warmer. Clouds thinned and scattered, revealing a sky more blue than any they remembered. Sunlight sparkled on water like scattered gems. At night, stars appeared. Familiar patterns hanging above an unfamiliar world. Shem taught his children their names, pointing out the constellations as his father had taught him. We are not lost, he told them. The stars remain. God's lights still guide us, even when all else has changed. Time passed differently without the rhythm of seasons or the cycle of planting and harvest. They marked days by feeding times and the sun's path. They counted weeks by the phases of the moon. But how long they had drifted, or how long they would continue, remained unknown. The animals grew restless as days stretched to weeks and weeks to months. They paced their enclosures, sensing somehow that this floating existence wasn't natural. Noah's family worked harder to keep them calm, speaking softly, grooming them, sometimes singing lullabies that echoed through wooden chambers. Food stores dwindled slower than feared. The careful rationing, the preserved grains and dried fruits, lasted longer than they'd hoped. Still, each meal required planning, each portion measured with care. They ate enough to sustain, never to satisfy. Water they had in abundance, collected from the last rains, stored in every container they could fashion. Clean water, washed of the corruption that had stained the old world. They drank it gratefully, remembering Noah's warnings of the time before, when even water had been tainted by human wickedness. 5 months passed since the rain began, 5 months of drifting. The ark no longer rocked violently, but moved with gentle swells. The constant motion became so familiar, they noticed only when it changed. A subtle shift in direction. A faint scraping sound from below. Noah felt it first, a tremor through the wooden floors, not the usual movement of waves, but something different. Something solid. His sons noticed his expression and gathered around. What is it? Japheth asked. Noah placed his palm flat against the planks. Feel, he said simply. They knelt beside him, hands pressed to wood. The sensation came again, faint but unmistakable. The ark had touched something beneath the water. Not yet landed, but no longer entirely adrift. Something solid existed in the watery void. Hope flickered across tired faces. Not land yet. The waters still stretched endlessly around them. But perhaps the first hint that land remained beneath the flood. Perhaps the waters had begun at last to recede. Desolation below. The waters receded by divine command, flowing back to ancient depths. Slowly, steadily. The flood that had covered mountains began its retreat. The change was gradual, inches each day, revealed only when Noah marked the water's edge against the ark's hull. On the 17th day of the 7th month, the ark came to rest, not on familiar plains or valleys, but on the heights of Ararat. Mountains thrust up toward heaven. Their peaks the first land to emerge from the fading flood. The impact sent tremors through wooden beams. Animals cried out in surprise. Stored jars toppled and rolled across uneven floors. Noah's family braced themselves against walls, suddenly still after months of constant motion. When the shuddering stopped, silence fell, strange, complete silence. No water lapping against wood. No creaking of a vessel in motion. The ark sat firmly grounded, tilted slightly on uneven terrain. Their floating journey had ended. Shem climbed to the highest window and looked out. Mountains. He called down to the others. I see mountain peaks rising from the water like islands. The family gathered below, passing his words from one to another. Mountains meant hope. Mountains meant the waters were indeed receding. But between those distant peaks, water still covered everything else: forests, fields, valleys. The world remained mostly drowned. Days passed. Then weeks. The ark sat motionless on its mountain perch, while waters continued their slow retreat. More land appeared daily, first as tiny islands, then as growing shores. Bare rock gleamed wet in sunlight. No green showed yet. No sign of life beyond their wooden walls. Noah watched and waited. God had brought them to rest but had not yet called them to leave. The time had not come to open the ark. The earth, though emerging, remained soaked and barren. Nothing could yet survive upon it. The first day of the 10th month brought new hope. Through the ark's small windows, they could see the tops of mountains clearly now, not just Ararat where they rested, but distant peaks as well. The flood's retreat had accelerated. Water draining away as if pulled by an unseen hand. Still, they waited. The ark became both sanctuary and prison. The animals grew more restless, sensing the changing world outside. They called to it with whines and howls that echoed through wooden chambers. Noah's family felt the same pull, the longing to feel solid ground, to breathe air not recycled through close quarters. 40 more days passed. The landscape outside transformed with each sunrise. Where once only mountain peaks had shone, now whole ranges stood revealed. Valleys emerged, still pooled with water. But no longer submerged. The world was returning. But return to what? That question kept Noah awake through the long nights of waiting. The release of the raven and dove. After 40 days of watching the waters recede, Noah made a decision. They needed to know if the earth had dried enough to sustain life. Words from God had guided them into the ark. Now they waited for a sign to leave it. Noah opened the window he had built into the ark's upper section. Fresh air rushed in, the first truly fresh breeze they had felt in nearly a year. They breathed deeply, faces turned toward the opening like flowers seeking light. Noah held a raven in his weathered hands. The bird's feathers gleamed black in the shaft of sunlight. Its eyes, bright with intelligence, looked from Noah to the open window and back again. "Go," Noah whispered. "Fly and return. Tell us what you find." The raven hesitated only a moment. Then it spread powerful wings and launched into open sky. They watched it soar upward, circle once, and fly off toward the horizon. The sky swallowed it whole. Days passed. The raven did not return. It found enough dead matter floating on the waters to sustain itself, going out and returning, back and forth, until the waters dried up completely. Its absence told them something: life could survive outside, but perhaps not yet thrive. 7 days later, Noah tried again. This time, he held a dove, smaller, more delicate, with soft gray feathers that shimmered in the light. This gentle bird needed more than the raven. It required rest, proper food, dry land. "Find green," Noah told it softly. "Find life for us." The dove flew through the window with a soft flutter of wings. They watched until it became a tiny speck against the vast sky. Then they returned to their tasks, waiting and wondering. Evening brought the answer. As light faded from the sky, a familiar wing beat sounded at the window. The dove had returned, tired from its journey. Noah lifted his hands, and the bird settled gratefully into them. It had found nothing, no place to rest its feet, no green thing growing in the still sodden world. The earth needed more time. 7 more days they waited. 7 days of tending animals grown increasingly restless, 7 days of rationing, supplies grown increasingly scarce, 7 days of hope mingled with doubt. On the 7th day, Noah again released the dove through the window. Again, they watched it fly until sight could no longer follow. Again, they returned to their waiting. The day passed slowly. Shadows lengthened across wooden floors. Just before sunset, when they had begun to fear the worst, the dove returned. This time, it carried something in its beak, a fresh olive leaf. Its green standing out like hope itself against the bird's pale feathers. The family gathered around as Noah gently took the leaf. They touched it with wondering fingers, fresh, not dried or dead. Recently plucked from a living tree. Somewhere beyond their wooden walls, plants had begun to grow again. The earth was healing. "A sign," Noah whispered. "God's promise kept." 7 more days passed before Noah released the dove a 3rd time. It flew from his hands into the evening light. They watched the sky until darkness fell, but the dove did not return that day. Nor the next. The bird had found a world ready to receive it, a place to build a nest, to live beyond the ark's confines. The time of waiting neared its end. The waters receded completely. On the 1st day of the 1st month of Noah's 601st year, something remarkable happened. He removed the covering from the ark and looked out upon a changed world. The floodwaters had fully receded. The ground appeared not yet dry, but no longer submerged. Muddy plains stretched where once water had ruled. Mountains rose in the distance, their slopes bare of the forests that had once clothed them. Rivers had found new paths, carving fresh valleys through soft earth. The world looked newborn, raw, unshaped, waiting for life to return. "Not yet," Noah told his eager sons when they pressed to leave. "The ground still holds too much water. We must wait until it firms." By the 27th day of the 2nd month, the earth had dried enough. Almost a full year had passed since the first raindrops fell, a year of floating, of darkness, of waiting, of faith tested by time and understood. "Let me know if you need anything else." "Got it. If you need anything else, feel free to let me know." "Understood. If you need more assistance, feel free to reach out." "Got it. Let me know if you need anything else." "Understood. Let me know if you need any further assistance." In time, children were born, the first generation who would know only this new world. They crawled on earth that had been cleansed by floodwaters, learned to walk on paths their parents had created, and grew strong eating food from soil that had lain dormant beneath the great waters. These children listened wide-eyed to tales of the ark and the rain that fell for 40 days and nights. To them, it seemed like a dream or a fable. But when storm clouds gathered and thunder rumbled across the sky, they would look to their grandparents' faces and see the shadow of memory there, and they understood that the stories were true. Noah grew older, watching his family bloom like the fields they tended. White threaded through his beard, and lines deepened around his eyes, but those eyes remained clear and sharp, watching over his growing legacy with quiet satisfaction. The world was being rebuilt, one seed, one stone, one child at a time. Noah's sons, the founders of nations. As years passed, the sons of Noah grew into men with families of their own. Each developed distinct skills and temperaments that would shape the nations they would found. Shem, the eldest, possessed a thoughtful nature and deep reverence for the God who had spared them. He spent hours in prayer and contemplation, passing down spiritual teachings to his children. Ham was bold and adventurous, often ranging far from their settlement to explore the renewed world. He returned with tales of distant mountains and valleys ripe for settlement. His eyes sparkled with excitement as he described lands where fruit grew wild and animals roamed in abundance. Japheth showed a gift for languages and communication. Even as their families grew and dialects began to shift, he maintained connections between the branching households. His laughter rang loud across evening gatherings, bringing people together with stories and songs. Children multiplied with each passing season. Noah's grandchildren grew tall and strong, each bearing subtle differences that would one day mark separate peoples. Some had darker skin from working long hours under the sun. Others grew paler in the northern regions where Japheth's line settled. Languages began to diversify as families spread across the recovering earth. You must remember where you came from, Noah would tell his grandchildren when they gathered at festival times. Remember the waters that cleanse the world and the covenant of the rainbow that binds us to our Creator. Shem's line remained closest to Noah, tending the original settlement that had grown into a prosperous village. They became keepers of the old stories, preserving the memory of Adam and Eve, of Enoch who walked with God, of Methuselah's long years, and of the flood that had changed everything. Ham's descendants pushed southward into warm lands, where they established thriving communities along fertile river valleys. They became skilled in agriculture and animal husbandry, developing new techniques for irrigation and crop rotation. Their settlements grew quickly, becoming the seeds of future civilizations. Japheth's children traveled northward and westward, adapting to cooler climates and coastal regions. They became traders and seafarers, building boats that skimmed across lakes and eventually ventured along shorelines. Their settlements dotted coastlines and river mouths, centers of exchange and communication. As decades passed, these separate branches of Noah's family tree grew more distinct. Their languages evolved in isolation from one another. Their customs adapted to different environments. Their physical characteristics shifted to suit their new homes. What began as subtle differences in accent or appearance gradually deepened into markers of separate peoples. Yet they remembered their common ancestry. At certain times, designated by Noah, representatives from all branches would return to the original settlement for gatherings of remembrance and celebration. They would share stories of their new homes, exchange goods and knowledge, and renew their connections to one another. During these gatherings, Noah would stand beneath the open sky, with his sons beside him. His voice, though grown reedy with age, still carried authority as he recounted once more the story of the ark and the waters. He would point to the rainbow when it appeared after rain showers, reminding all present of God's promise never again to destroy the earth by flood. You are brothers and sisters, he would tell them, though you speak differently and live apart. Remember that you came from one family, saved by one ark, under one sky. As Noah's years advanced, these gatherings grew larger and more diverse. Children who had never known the world before the flood now had children of their own. The direct memory of the deluge faded with each generation, preserved only in stories passed down from parents to children around evening fires. Maps were drawn on animal skins, marking the territories where each branch of the family had settled. Traders established routes between these growing settlements, bringing news and goods from distant relatives. The world was being reclaimed, populated anew by the descendants of the one family that had floated above the waters of judgment. Ham's transgression. The incident occurred during the wine harvest, when grapes hung heavy on vines planted decades earlier. Noah had discovered the art of winemaking, crushing the sweet fruit and allowing its juice to ferment in clay vessels. The wine brought joy during festivals and eased the aches that had settled into his aging bones. One evening, after sampling his newest vintage, Noah drank more deeply than usual. Perhaps the wine was stronger than he expected, or perhaps the weight of his memories pressed more heavily that night. Whatever the reason, he soon found himself overcome, stumbling to his tent. He collapsed inside, his robe falling open as sleep claimed him. Ham, returning late from the fields, entered his father's tent without announcing himself. There he discovered Noah lying uncovered, vulnerable in his nakedness. Instead of discreetly covering his father, Ham went out to his brothers, laughing as he described what he had seen. "Father lies drunk in his tent," he told Shem and Japheth, amusement coloring his voice. "The man who survived the flood cannot survive his own wine." Shem's face darkened at these words. "Show respect," he said sternly. "Would you mock the man through whom God saved us all?" Japheth nodded in agreement, his eyes sad. "Our father carries burdens we cannot imagine. He has seen the world die and be reborn. If wine brings him comfort, who are we to judge?" Together, the two brothers took a garment, laid it across their shoulders, and walked backward into Noah's tent. With eyes averted in respect, they covered their father's nakedness. Not once did they look upon him in his vulnerable state, preserving his dignity even in his unawareness. When Noah woke the next morning, his head pounding, fragments of memory returned. Someone had entered his tent, voices had filtered through his wine-induced slumber, questioning his sons. He learned what had transpired, Ham's disrespect and his brother's honorable response. Anger and sorrow filled Noah's heart. In Ham's actions, he saw something of the world before the flood. The disregard for authority, the lack of reverence, the seeds of chaos that had led to the earth's destruction. With heavy words, he pronounced judgment. "Cursed be Canaan," he declared, referring not to Ham himself but to his son, a pronouncement that would echo through generations. "A servant of servants shall he be to his brothers." These words fell like stones into still water, sending ripples through the family. Some questioned why Canaan should bear the weight of his father's transgression. Others saw in Noah's words a prophetic vision of how disrespect could lead to bondage and loss of blessing. Ham withdrew from his father's presence, taking his family to settle in more distant lands. The close bond that had united Noah's sons through the flood and its aftermath now stretched thin, like wool pulled almost to breaking. Family gatherings grew tense, with unspoken grievances hanging in the air between brothers. Canaan grew to manhood under the shadow of his grandfather's words. Whether the curse shaped his character or merely foretold what was already written in his nature, he developed a hardness that marked his descendants for generations to come. Shem and Japheth received Noah's blessing. "Blessed be the Lord, the God of Shem," Noah said. "May God enlarge Japheth, and let him dwell in the tents of Shem." These words hinted at how their descendants would relate to one another in centuries to come, sometimes as allies, sometimes as rivals, but always connected by blood and history. The incident revealed fractures within what had seemed a united family. It showed that even those who had witnessed God's judgment were not immune to sin's persistent presence. The waters had cleansed the earth but had not washed away the capacity for wrongdoing that lurked in human hearts. In later years, as Noah's strength waned, he would sometimes gaze toward the distant settlements where Ham's family had established themselves. His eyes would fill with tears, not of anger, but of sorrow for the broken relationships that even he, the survivor of the great flood, could not mend. The story of Ham's transgression was told quietly, a cautionary tale passed from parent to child. It taught lessons about respect, about the sanctity of family bonds. about how quickly trust could be broken and how difficult it was to rebuild. For some, it explained the origins of ancient conflicts; for others, it served as a warning about the cost of mockery and disrespect. The Tower of Babel, humanity's arrogance. Generations passed, and Noah's descendants multiplied across the face of the earth. Their settlements grew into villages, then towns, some eventually becoming cities with walls and watchtowers. They developed skills in metalwork, pottery, and weaving. Knowledge increased, and with it came pride in human achievement. In the land of Shinar, a vast plain between two great rivers, many families came together to build a great city. The land offered rich soil for farming, clay for bricks, and bitumen that bubbled from the ground, perfect for mortar. The people spoke one language, their words flowing smoothly between them without misunderstanding. "Let us build ourselves a city," they said to one another, "and a tower with its top in the heavens. Let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the earth." Fear of dispersal drove them, a desire to remain united through their own strength rather than through obedience to God's command to fill the earth. The memory of the flood had faded, and with it the humility that came from recognizing divine judgment and mercy. Instead of spreading out, as Noah's sons had done, they clustered together, finding safety in numbers and human ingenuity. They formed bricks from clay and baked them in kilns until they became hard as stone. With these uniform blocks, they began building their city on the plain. At its center would stand a tower unlike any structure ever raised, a ziggurat reaching toward the sky, defying both natural limitations and divine authority. Day by day, the tower grew taller. Workers passed bricks hand to hand up ramps that spiraled around the growing structure. The base stretched wide, supporting the weight of ambition that rose ever higher. From a distance, it appeared as if a new mountain was rising from the plain, shaped by human hands rather than natural forces. God looked down upon the city and the tower. He saw not just the physical structure, but the motivations behind it: pride, fear, and a desire for self-glorification. He saw how mankind sought to reach heaven through their own efforts, to make a name for themselves rather than honoring the name of their Creator. "Behold," said the Lord, "they are one people, and they have all one language. And this is only the beginning of what they will do. Nothing that they propose to do will now be impossible for them." These words acknowledged the potential of human unity and ingenuity, qualities given by God Himself, but now turned toward purposes that ignored His sovereignty. Left unchecked, this path would lead to greater corruption, as it had in the days before the flood. So God confused their language. Men who had worked side by side for months suddenly found themselves unable to understand each other's words. Instructions became meaningless sounds. Questions went unanswered because they could not be comprehended. Confusion gave way to frustration, then anger, then fear. Workers abandoned their tools where they stood. Families gathered those they could understand, usually their closest relatives, and withdrew from others who now spoke incomprehensible tongues. The project halted as communication collapsed. The half-built tower stood as a monument to interrupted ambition. Some tried to continue construction, gesturing frantically to convey what words no longer could, but without clear communication, coordinated effort became impossible. Mistakes multiplied, sections built by different groups no longer matched. The grand design fragmented into competing visions. Gradually, people began leaving the city. Groups that shared a common language gathered their belongings and set out in different directions, seeking lands where they could establish new homes among those they understood. The very scattering they had feared came upon them because of their attempt to prevent it. The city became known as Babel, meaning confusion, a name that captured the divine intervention that had dissolved their unity of purpose. The tower remained unfinished, its upper portions gradually crumbling away as rain and wind worked upon abandoned construction. From this dispersion came the diversity of nations and tongues that would mark human history thereafter. Families that shared language formed tribes, tribes became peoples. And peoples developed into distinct cultures with their own customs, beliefs, and ways of life. The children of Shem, Ham, and Japheth spread across continents, fulfilling at last the command to fill the earth that had been given first to Adam and later to Noah. In time, the story of Babel was told in many languages around many fires. It served as a reminder of the limitations of human pride and the sovereignty of the Creator, who had both saved mankind through the ark and scattered mankind through confusion of tongues. Both acts, salvation and dispersion, were seen as expressions of divine wisdom working through human history. The unfinished tower slowly returned to the earth from which its bricks had been formed. But its memory remained a cautionary tale about the dangers of unified human ambition divorced from divine purpose. Generations later, ziggurats would rise again in Mesopotamia. But none would carry the same audacious goal of reaching heaven through human effort alone. The nations spread out after the confusion at Babel. Human communities scattered like seeds cast by a farmer's hand. They followed rivers, crossed mountain passes, and traversed valleys, each group speaking a language others could not understand. These migrations shaped the face of the ancient world, creating distinct peoples where once there had been one. The descendants of Shem moved eastward and settled in lands that would later be known as Mesopotamia, the territory between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. They became the Semitic peoples: Assyrians, Babylonians, Arameans, and Hebrews. Their languages shared common roots but evolved into distinct tongues as distance and time separated them. Ham's children journeyed south into the warm lands of Canaan, Egypt, and beyond. They built cities along the Nile, establishing what would become one of the world's greatest civilizations. Others settled along the Mediterranean coast, becoming skilled sailors and traders. Their dark skin adapted well to the harsh sun of these southern regions. Japheth's line traveled northwest into what would later be called Asia Minor, and then across narrow seas into the lands that would become Europe. They were the ancestors of Greeks, Romans, and many northern tribes. Fair-skinned and often tall, they adapted to cooler climates and forested landscapes. As these groups moved apart, they developed distinct cultural identities. Different environments demanded different solutions for survival. In river valleys, they created irrigation systems for agriculture. In coastal regions, they built boats and learned to harvest the sea. In mountain areas, they became shepherds, following seasonal patterns of rainfall and growth. Languages continued to evolve, sprouting new dialects that eventually became separate tongues. Words for familiar objects changed, grammar shifted, pronunciation altered, until speakers of related languages could no longer understand one another. The tower's legacy continued to unfold in this linguistic diversity. Yet these scattered peoples carried with them fragments of shared memory, stories of creation, of early ancestors, of a great flood that had cleansed the earth. These narratives survived in oral tradition, passed down through generations around evening fires, subtly changing with each telling but preserving core truths about humanity's origins and relationship with divine powers. Trade gradually reconnected some of these separated communities. Merchants traveled between settlements, learning enough of foreign tongues to barter and exchange goods. Amber from northern forests made its way to southern palaces. Blue lapis lazuli from eastern mountains adorned the necks of western chieftains. Along with these material goods traveled ideas, technologies, and stories. Some groups grew powerful through conquest and expansion. Strong leaders emerged who could unite tribes under common banners, creating the first kingdoms. Walls rose around cities. Armies formed to protect territories and resources. The seeds of empire were planted as ambitious rulers sought to control more land and people. Writing systems developed independently in several regions: cuneiform in Mesopotamia, hieroglyphics in Egypt, and various scripts in the Indus Valley and China. These allowed for record-keeping, laws, and the preservation of knowledge across generations. With writing came more structured societies, complex religious systems, and the beginnings of historical consciousness. Great rivers became the cradles of these emerging civilizations. The Nile, flowing northward through Egypt, brought regular floods that deposited rich soil for farming. The Tigris and Euphrates created the Fertile Crescent, where Sumerian city-states flourished. The Indus supported a sophisticated urban culture in what is now Pakistan. The Yellow River nurtured the early Chinese states. Relationships between neighboring peoples were complex, sometimes peaceful, with cultural exchange and intermarriage, sometimes hostile. With raids and warfare over resources and territory. Trade routes became channels for both commerce and conflict. As different groups competed for control of valuable resources and strategic locations. In freshly washed skies, Noah took special joy in his grandchildren and great-grandchildren. Seeing in each new face the fulfillment of God's promise to preserve human life, he blessed them with weathered hands, praying they would build a world kinder than the one the waters had claimed. Yet he also saw troubling signs, the growing pride at Babel, the return of violence, the slow forgetting of divine warnings. The vineyard Noah planted became his special retreat in later years. Among the vines, he found peace, watching seasons cycle from tender green shoots to heavy purple clusters. The rhythm of planting and harvest reminded him of life's continuity despite the flood's disruption. Wine from his grapes brought warmth to cold evenings and loosened tongues for storytelling. On quiet nights, Noah sometimes dreamed of the ark, its creaking timbers, the smell of animals, the sound of rain on the roof. He would wake reaching for his wife. Grateful to find solid ground beneath their bed rather than rocking waves, these dream returns to the ark grew more frequent as his earthly journey neared its end. Noah's relationship with God deepened through his final years. The young man who had walked with God became an elder who sat in God's presence, comfortable with both speech and silence. Their covenant remained unbroken, the rainbow still appeared after storms, and the seasons continued their steady progression, when death finally approached. Noah faced it with the same quiet faith that had sustained him through the flood. He gathered his sons for final blessings. Reminding them of their responsibility to teach future generations about both judgment and mercy, he spoke of the God who brings waters of destruction, but also waters of life. Noah died surrounded by family, his passing peaceful compared to the cataclysm he had survived. They buried him with honor, this man who had been both an ending and a beginning. With him died the last living memory of the world before the flood, its beauty and its corruption, its light and its darkness, yet Noah's legacy continued through bloodlines and stories. His sons ensured that each generation heard the account of the ark, the animals, the raven and the dove, the receding waters, the rainbow promise, around evening fires and morning tables. The story passed from parent to child, preserving its warning and its hope. In time, scribes would record these oral traditions, fixing Noah's story in written form through scrolls and codices. Translations and interpretations would reach beyond his descendants to touch all humanity. The ancient mariner who had navigated a world of water would continue guiding seekers across the centuries. The promise revisited, the rainbow in the covenant. When clouds gather and rain begins to fall, a primal fear still stirs within us. Will the waters rise beyond control? Will the world again drown beneath heaven's tears? Then comes the rainbow, arcing across clearing skies, 7 colors bridging earth and heaven, reminding us of an ancient promise. God's covenant with Noah stands as the first formal agreement between Creator and created in biblical tradition. Its terms were simple yet profound. Never again would all life be cut off by floodwaters. Never again would the earth be destroyed by water. The rainbow would serve as sign and reminder of this divine commitment. Unlike later biblical covenants, this agreement required no human response. It represented pure grace, a unilateral promise from God to all living creatures. Noah and his descendants didn't need to fulfill conditions or meet obligations to maintain this covenant. The rainbow appeared whether humans remembered or forgot. Whether they turned toward God or away, this unconditional quality makes the Noah covenant unique. Later agreements with Abraham, Moses, and David would involve mutual responsibilities, blessings contingent on faithfulness, but the rainbow promise stood apart, a gift freely given to a world still damp from judgment. The covenant extended beyond humanity to include every living creature, the animals saved on the ark and all their descendants. This inclusion reminds us that God's care encompasses the entire created order, not just human beings. The rainbow shines for sparrow as much as for sovereign, for deer as much as for diplomat. 7 colors span the rainbow's arch, perhaps echoing the 7 days of creation, what floods destroyed, God promised to preserve, the rhythm of seasons, the boundaries of seas. The fruitfulness of earth, the world might face troubles and trials, but never again total aquatic annihilation. Local floods might come, but not world-ending waters. Rainbows appear precisely when storm meets sunshine, when darkness gives way to light. This timing itself carries meaning. The covenant comes not before trouble, but after enduring it. Hope arrives not by avoiding clouds, but by passing through them into renewed brightness. Throughout history, peoples across cultures have looked up at rainbows with wonder. Many traditions independently associated these colored arcs with divine messages or bridges between worlds. The Genesis account gives specific meaning to this universal experience. Each rainbow announces again the message never again. For Noah's immediate family, rainbows likely triggered powerful memories, the years of building, the months of floating, the grief of loss. The joy of new beginnings. With each sighting, they remembered both judgment and mercy, the delicate balance between divine justice and compassion. Today, we've explained the science behind rainbows, light refracting through water droplets, splitting into its component colors, yet this knowledge doesn't diminish their wonder or symbolic power. If anything, understanding the precision of natural laws that create rainbows reinforces faith in the Creator who established those laws and promises to maintain them. The flood in modern culture. Noah's Ark appears in children's nurseries, adorned with cartoon animals marching 2 by 2. Colorful boat-shaped toys fill playrooms, introducing the flood story through play. These gentle versions focus on animals and rainbows while softening the flood's harsher elements, making ancient truths accessible to young minds. Museums and theme parks have built full-sized Ark replicas, allowing visitors to experience the vessel's massive scale. Kentucky's Ark encounter stretches longer than a football field, helping people visualize the biblical dimensions. Inside, exhibits attempt to answer practical questions about animal care, waste management, and food storage during the year-long voyage. Creative aspects of divine power, water that destroyed also cleansed, judgment led to renewal. From ornate Persian miniatures to children's book illustrations. From Byzantine mosaics to Renaissance masterpieces, artists across centuries have depicted the Ark riding turbulent waters or resting on mountain peaks. These visual representations kept the story alive in public imagination, each culture adding its own perspective to the ancient narrative. The rainbow, described in Genesis as the sign of God's covenant never again to destroy the earth by flood, appeared in many cultures as a symbol of divine human reconciliation. This colorful arc connecting heaven and earth reminded viewers of both judgment past and mercy granted, a visual echo of the flood story visible after every cleansing rain. Reflections on the flood. Why did it happen? The question echoed through generations. Why did the waters come? As people contemplated the flood story passed down from Noah, they sought meaning beyond mere historical account. What could explain such divine wrath? What lessons should be drawn from waters that both destroyed and cleansed? Ancient sages saw the flood as punishment for moral corruption. In their view, violence had filled the earth, thoughts of human hearts had turned continuously toward evil. The Hebrew scriptures described God looking upon creation and feeling grief at what had become of the world he had pronounced very good. According to this understanding, the deluge came as necessary judgment, painful, but just. Others emphasized the mercy shown even within judgment. A righteous few had been spared, animal kinds had been preserved. Life had been given another chance. The ark itself represented divine compassion, instruction provided for survival, time granted for building, space ensured for future generations. The rainbow that followed embodied this perspective, standing as a promise that complete destruction would not come again by water. Some traditions viewed the flood as a cleansing rather than punishment alone. The world had become polluted by violence and corruption. Waters washed it clean for a fresh beginning. This interpretation highlighted renewal rather than retribution, seeing in the receding waters the possibility of a world remade and a humanity given second chance. Philosophical minds questioned whether the flood represented divine intervention in natural processes or natural disaster invested with spiritual meaning. Did God send the waters? Or did human spiritual perception simply recognize divine purpose within natural catastrophe? Such questions led to deeper reflections on how divine will operates within the material world. Religious teachers drew practical ethical lessons from the narrative. Noah's obedience despite ridicule demonstrated faith's perseverance. His family's unity illustrated how communal bonds could preserve life through disaster. The detailed instructions for the ark suggested the importance of careful attention to divine guidance. The Rainbow Covenant established the value of promise-keeping in human-divine relationships. Some saw the flood as necessary transition between world ages, the antediluvian world of exceptional human longevity giving way to shorter, more bounded human lifespans. In this view, the flood marked a cosmic boundary, creating discontinuity between what had been and what would be, like sleep dividing one day from another. Mystics penetrated to symbolic dimensions of the narrative. The ark floating on chaotic waters represented the human soul carried safely through life's turbulence. The olive branch returned by the dove symbolized peace following spiritual trial. The emergence onto Mount Ararat signified elevation of consciousness after passing through depths of transformation. Scientific minds, emerging in later centuries, sought physical explanations that might account for flood traditions. They pointed to evidence of glacial melting at the end of the Ice Age, causing sea levels to rise dramatically. Others noted how Black Sea flooding around 5600 BCE could have displaced entire populations and created enduring trauma. Still others suggested that cometary impacts or massive tectonic shifts might have triggered catastrophic flooding within human memory. Psychological perspectives explored how flood narratives might express collective human anxieties about chaos and order. Waters represented primal formlessness threatening to overwhelm human structures. The ark embodied containment and preservation of what was essential. The story thus articulated deep psychological patterns of threat, survival, and renewal that resonated across cultures. Literary scholars noted how the flood story followed patterns seen in many hero journeys: separation from the ordinary world, trial by ordeal, return with transformed understanding. Noah, like other mythic heroes, crossed boundaries between worlds and returned bearing wisdom for his descendants. His journey through waters of chaos into a new creation paralleled spiritual transformation narratives found worldwide. For ordinary people through centuries, the flood story offered framework for understanding their own experiences of devastation and renewal. Those who lost homes to natural disasters, communities to warfare, or loved ones to disease could find in Noah's experience patterns for processing grief and rebuilding life. The waters became metaphor for all that threatens human existence. The ark represented hope's persistence. Theologians debated whether the flood should be understood literally or figuratively. Some insisted on historical factuality, calculating the ark's dimensions and mapping possible landing sites on Mount Ararat. Others focused on theological truth conveyed through narrative, seeing in the story eternal patterns of sin, judgment, mercy, and covenant, rather than merely historical events. Environmental thinkers of later eras found in the flood story early awareness of humanity's responsibility toward creation. Noah had preserved animal species, recognized human dependence on natural systems, and received divine mandate for environmental stewardship after waters receded. In this reading, the story warned against exploitation that could trigger natural catastrophe. Political philosophers noted how the flood narrative explored tensions between individual righteousness and societal corruption. Noah maintained integrity despite surrounding decay. His salvation demonstrated how personal virtue might preserve life even when social structures collapsed. Yet his story also showed limits of individual action when wider society refused transformation. Through all these interpretations ran common threads: recognition of human moral responsibility, awareness of life's fragility, hope for renewal after destruction, faith in divine purposes operating through history's turbulence. The flood story endured because it addressed fundamental human questions about existence, morality, suffering, and hope, with imagery powerful enough to speak across cultural boundaries. Whatever meanings later generations found in the narrative, those who first told it around evening fires conveyed something they believed true about the human condition. That actions have consequences, that creation contains both destruction and renewal, that divine concern extends through judgment to mercy. And that, through even the darkest waters, life finds ways to continue. The legacy of the flood. Generations later, centuries passed. The world filled once more with people. Cities rose where once only the ark had floated, and empires spread across lands purified by ancient waters. Yet the story remained, carried forward by descendants who traced their lineage back to Noah's 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. The flood became more than memory, it shaped identities and worldviews across generations. From Shem's line came Abraham, called from the city of Ur to journey toward an unknown land of promise. His descendants, Isaac, Jacob, and the 12 tribes of Israel, carried forward the memory of the flood and its covenant. They understood themselves as heirs to Noah's righteousness, entrusted with preserving knowledge of both divine judgment and mercy. Moses, leading these people from Egyptian bondage centuries later, recorded the flood narrative in written form. What had been oral tradition became sacred text, preserved with careful precision. The story took its place within a larger narrative of creation, fall, and redemption that would form spiritual foundation for generations to come. Prophets of Israel referred back to the flood when warning of coming judgments or promising divine faithfulness. "As I swore that the waters of Noah should no more go over the earth," declared Isaiah, "so have I sworn that I would not be angry with you nor rebuke you." The flood became touchstone for understanding all later divine-human interactions. When Babylonian forces conquered Jerusalem in 586 BCE, exiles carried their flood story into lands where similar traditions existed. There, they encountered the Epic of Gilgamesh, with its Utnapishtim narrative. Far from undermining their faith, these parallels reinforced belief that their story preserved genuine memory of events other cultures recalled only partially. During this Babylonian exile, Jewish scholars compiled and edited their sacred texts, including the flood account. They emphasized monotheistic elements that distinguished their version from polytheistic flood narratives, one God acting in moral purpose, rather than quarreling deities. They highlighted the covenant rainbow as unique feature, showing divine commitment to creation's continuity. When these exiles returned to rebuild Jerusalem, they brought renewed emphasis on covenant keeping as protection against divine displeasure. Regular readings of sacred texts, including the flood narrative, reminded communities of both historical judgment and enduring promise. The story became foundation for ethical living, avoiding corruptions that had triggered divine wrath. Alexander the Great's conquests later spread Greek culture across regions where flood traditions existed. Hellenistic scholars noted similarities between diverse flood accounts and debated their significance. Some suggested common historical origin, others saw universal psychological patterns. This cross-cultural conversation enriched understanding of humanity's shared narrative heritage. When Christianity emerged in the 1st century CE, it incorporated the flood story into its theology. Jesus himself referenced Noah when speaking of future judgment: "As it was in the days of Noah, so will it be at the coming of the Son of Man." Early Christian writers saw the ark as prefiguring salvation through Christ, waters of baptism echoing floodwaters of both destruction and cleansing. Christian art, in catacombs and early churches, depicted Noah's Ark as symbol of the church, carrying believers safely through worldly chaos. The dove with olive branch became emblem of Holy Spirit bringing peace. 8 souls saved in the ark were linked numerologically to the 8th day of resurrection and new creation. Islamic tradition later embraced Noah, as important prophet. It described his preaching to unbelieving people and his construction of the ark under divine guidance. Like other Abrahamic faiths, Islam saw the flood as demonstration of both divine justice toward wrongdoing and mercy toward faithful believers. Medieval European culture wove flood imagery into literature, art, and architecture. Cathedral sculptures depicted Noah's family and paired animals. Mystery plays reenacted the deluge for audiences who saw themselves potentially facing divine judgment. Bestiaries catalogued animals based on which had entered the ark, categorizing God's creatures through flood-derived taxonomy. Renaissance artists created masterful flood paintings, showing turbulent waters engulfing humanity, while the ark floated serenely above chaos. These visual interpretations reflected tension between divine judgment and salvation. Renaissance artists created masterful flood paintings, showing turbulent waters engulfing humanity, while the ark floated serenely above chaos. These visual interpretations reflected tension between divine judgment and salvation, between destruction and preservation. Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel panels devoted significant space to Noah's story, placing the flood within humanity's grand narrative. As European exploration opened new worlds, missionaries carried flood stories to indigenous peoples, often surprised to find similar narratives already existing in local traditions. These parallels were sometimes used as bridges for cultural understanding, points of connection between otherwise distant worldviews. Native peoples often recognized familiar elements in biblical accounts that resonated with their own flood traditions. The scientific revolution brought new perspectives on the flood narrative. Geologists studying rock formations questioned whether physical evidence supported a worldwide deluge. Biologists wondered how all animal species could have fit into a single vessel. These inquiries led some to reinterpret the story as a regional rather than global event, or as spiritual truth conveyed through symbolic narrative. Others responded by seeking scientific evidence for a literal worldwide flood. They pointed to marine fossils found on mountaintops, to apparently rapid sediment deposition, to widespread flood traditions as supporting literal interpretation. This approach, eventually called flood geology, attempted to harmonize biblical narrative with scientific observation. The discovery of ancient Mesopotamian flood accounts, written on clay tablets in the 19th century, sparked new scholarly interest. The Gilgamesh epic and the Atrahasis epic showed striking parallels to biblical accounts, suggesting common origin while highlighting distinctive theological elements of each tradition. These findings placed Noah's story within a broader ancient Near Eastern cultural context. Throughout these centuries of interpretation, the flood narrative retained remarkable resilience. It survived translation into countless languages, adaptation across diverse cultures, scrutiny by varied intellectual traditions. Its imagery, of waters covering earth, of an ark carrying life's future, of a rainbow promising new beginnings, maintained power to stir imagination and shape understanding. More than a tale of ancient catastrophe, the flood story became a framework for comprehending human moral responsibility and divine response. It offered vocabulary for discussing sin's consequences, righteousness amid corruption, salvation through obedience, and covenant relationship between Creator and creation. These themes transcended specific historical circumstances, speaking to each generation's existential concerns. The legacy of the flood continues today, not merely as historical memory but as living metaphor. We still speak of weathering storms and staying afloat in difficult times. We describe overwhelm as feeling flooded, and use watershed moments to mark significant transitions. The ancient waters that covered earth have seeped into our language, carrying their symbolic power into contemporary expression. Mankind rebuilds. New cities, new kings. From the fertile plains between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers rose the first great cities after the flood. Eridu, Uruk, and others grew from humble villages into centers of trade and learning. Their mud brick walls gleamed in the sun, and their ziggurats reached toward heaven, though none dared build too high, remembering the tower that had once been abandoned. Kings arose to rule these early cities, claiming divine right and earthly power. The first recorded king after the flood was Nimrod, a mighty hunter before the Lord and great-grandson of Noah through Ham. His kingdom began in Babylon and Erech, in the land of Shinar, places where people gathered for safety and prosperity. Along the Nile River, other descendants built monuments of stone that would stand for thousands of years. They developed writing systems to record their histories and beliefs. Hieroglyphs told stories of creation and destruction, of gods who shaped the world and brought great floods when angered. In the east, across mountains and deserts, other cities took root along the Indus River Valley. Planned communities with sophisticated drainage systems showed that Noah's descendants had learned the importance of managing water. These people traded with distant lands, exchanging goods and stories. To the north, nomadic tribes followed herds across vast steppes. They lived in tents or simple shelters, moving with the seasons. Their lives centered around animals, horses, sheep, cattle, gifts preserved through the flood and multiplied in the New World. Craftsmen rediscovered and improved upon the skills known before the flood. They worked metal, first copper, then bronze, a mixture of copper and tin. Tools grew sharper, weapons, more deadly. The simple life of Noah's immediate family gave way to societies with different roles and classes. Law codes developed to maintain order in growing communities. Some of these, like the Code of Hammurabi, echoed principles of justice that Noah might have recognized, though often harsher than God's commands. Kings claimed to speak for the gods, setting themselves as mediators between heaven and earth. Trade routes connected distant regions. Merchants traveled dangerous paths, carrying precious goods, spices, metals, textiles, and luxury items. With trade came cultural exchange, with cultural change came the spreading of flood stories from one people to another. Languages evolved and multiplied, just as God had intended at Babel. Yet beneath the different words lay common concepts, shared memories of a time when water covered the world, and a family floated above the chaos in a wooden vessel. Wars began again as cities competed for resources and power. The violence that had prompted God to send the flood returned, though never again on such a scale that divine judgment would come through water. The rainbow promise held firm as mankind rebuilt their world, for better and worse. Echoes of the flood, from Sumer to Greece. In ancient Sumer, the Epic of Gilgamesh told of Utnapishtim, who built a boat to survive a great flood sent by angry gods. The hero Gilgamesh sought this flood survivor, hoping to learn the secret of eternal life. The tale, pressed into clay tablets, shared striking similarities with Noah's story, a divine warning, a large boat, the landing on a mountain, the sending of birds to find dry land. Nearby, Babylonian scribes recorded the Atrahasis epic, where a flood hero saved animals and his family from divine destruction. In this telling, the gods sent the flood because humans made too much noise, disturbing divine sleep. After the waters receded, the gods regretted their harsh judgment, just as the Bible describes God's covenant never again to flood the earth. Further east, ancient Indian texts spoke of Manu, who was warned by a fish to build a ship before a world-destroying deluge. The fish, an avatar of the god Vishnu, towed Manu's boat to safety on a northern mountain. From Manu came all human beings, who repopulated the empty earth. In China, legends told of a great flood that lasted for generations. The hero Yu gained fame not for building an ark, but for dredging canals to control the flood waters. Through his efforts, land became farmable again, and civilization could flourish. His story merged historical floods with cosmic memory. The Greeks shared tales of Deucalion and his wife Pyrrha, who survived a flood sent by Zeus to punish human wickedness. Their boat landed on Mount Parnassus. And they repopulated the world by throwing stones over their shoulders, which transformed into people. Ancient Aztecs, in what would later be called Mexico, passed down stories of multiple world ages, each ending in destruction. In one version, only a couple named Coxcox and Sakakal survived in a hollow log, later having children who spoke different languages. Across oceans and mountains, these diverse cultures preserved memories of a catastrophic flood. While details varied, the cause of divine anger, the shape of the boat, the number of survivors, key elements remained consistent. Divine judgment, a chosen family, rising waters, and a new beginning. These echoes suggest a common memory passed down through generations and carried across continents as people migrated. The flood story survived not just in sacred texts but in the cultural memory of peoples who had never met, yet shared this defining tale of destruction and rebirth. What makes Noah's account unique among these flood stories is the moral clarity of its message. The biblical flood came specifically as judgment for wickedness, yet ended with a covenant of mercy. God promised never again to destroy the world by water, and gave the rainbow as a lasting sign of this commitment. Scholars debate whether these similar narratives prove the historical reality of a worldwide flood, or simply point to regional catastrophes that grew in the telling. Yet, the persistence of flood stories across unconnected cultures suggests that something profound lies at their core, perhaps the shared memory of an ancient truth. The flood in art and culture. Artists through the ages have found inspiration in Noah's story, capturing its drama and meaning in countless works. Early Christians in Rome painted simple images of the ark in catacombs, using it as a symbol of salvation amidst persecution. The small boat represented the church, carrying believers safely through troubled waters. Medieval manuscript illuminators depicted the flood with vivid colors and gold leaf in their paintings. The ark floats serenely above drowning sinners, a stark reminder of divine judgment. Noah often appears at a window, his face peaceful despite the chaos below, trusting in God's protection. When the Renaissance brought renewed interest in biblical subjects, Michelangelo painted the flood on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. His powerful image shows desperate humans climbing hills and clinging to trees as waters rise around them. The ark appears small in the background, hope distant but real. Northern European painters like Jan Bruegel created detailed landscapes showing the flood receding, with the ark perched precariously on mountain slopes. Animals emerge two by two onto muddy ground while rainbows arch across clearing skies. These works mixed biblical fidelity with contemporary landscapes, bringing ancient stories into the painter's present. Woodcarvers and sculptors crafted arks as children's toys, teaching the story through play. These miniature ships with paired animals have delighted young ones for centuries, making Noah's tale among the first Bible stories many children learn. In literature, the flood appears as both central subject and powerful metaphor. John Milton included it in his epic Paradise Lost. While countless poets have used flood imagery to represent overwhelming change or emotional turmoil, writers found in Noah the archetype of the righteous loner, standing firm against a corrupt society. Music, too, has retold the flood narrative. From medieval chants to Baroque oratorios, composers set the drama to powerful melodies. Benjamin Britten's Noise Fludda involved children as the animals, making them participants in the ancient story. Folk songs and spirituals referred to the ark as a symbol of shelter in troubled times. Modern filmmakers have attempted to capture the flood scale through special effects. Movies, ranging from reverent adaptations to loose interpretations, have brought Noah's experience to new generations. Some focus on the spectacular destruction, others on the family drama within the ark, but all grapple with the story's enduring power. In architecture, some churches were designed with upside-down boat shapes for their roofs, reminding worshippers that the church, like the ark, offers sanctuary from the world's corruption. The most literal interpretation came from full-sized ark replicas. built as tourist attractions and teaching tools. Even in casual speech, Noah's story influences our language. We speak of weathering the storm, olive branches as peace offerings, and saving things for a rainy day. These phrases connect us unconsciously to the ancient narrative, showing how deeply the flood account has shaped human expression. Scientific perspectives. Was there a real flood? Geologists have found evidence of massive flooding events throughout Earth's history. The end of the last ice age, roughly 12,000 years ago, saw dramatic rises in sea levels. As glaciers melted, coastal lands, where people may have lived, disappeared beneath advancing waters, perhaps leaving memories that evolved into flood legends. The Black Sea once existed as a freshwater lake, until rising Mediterranean waters broke through the Bosporus Strait around 5600 BC. This catastrophic event flooded coastal settlements and transformed the region. Some scholars suggest this might have inspired flood stories throughout the Middle East, as survivors carried their experiences to new homes in Mesopotamia. Archaeological digs have uncovered thick silt layers indicating major floods of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. One layer, dating to about 3000 BC, covered the ancient city of Shuruppak with several feet of mud. Such regional disasters, though not global, would have seemed world-ending to those who experienced them. The Persian Gulf basin shows signs of having been dry land during the last ice age. As waters rose, human settlements would have been slowly swallowed by the advancing sea. People living through such gradual yet unstoppable changes might have preserved the memory as a sudden catastrophe. Some researchers propose that a large comet or asteroid impact in the ocean could have caused enormous tsunami waves, flooding coastal regions worldwide. Such an event might explain flood stories appearing in widely separated cultures. Modern scientific consensus holds that no single worldwide flood covered all continents simultaneously as described in Genesis. The amount of water required would far exceed what exists on Earth, and no geological mechanism could suddenly add and then remove such vast amounts of water. Yet this scientific perspective doesn't necessarily contradict the spiritual truth of Noah's story. Many theologians suggest the account describes a regional flood that appeared worldwide to its witnesses, who had no concept of global geography. The Hebrew word for earth can also mean land or region, allowing for different interpretations of the flood's scope. Others maintain that the biblical flood was truly global, but left evidence that scientists interpret differently due to their assumptions about geological processes. These scholars point to marine fossils found on mountaintops and vast sedimentary rock layers as possible flood evidence. The discovery of hundreds of submerged settlements beneath today's oceans shows that rising waters have indeed claimed human habitations throughout history. Perhaps Noah's story preserves the memory of one such dramatic loss, elevated to cosmic significance through its spiritual meaning. Psychological and moral themes. The flood as a symbol. Deep within us lies a fear of drowning, of being overwhelmed by forces beyond our control. The flood story speaks to this primal anxiety, offering both warning and comfort. It acknowledges the chaos that threatens our ordered lives while promising that chaos will not have the final word. Water itself carries dual symbolism, it brings both death and life. The flood waters destroyed a corrupt world, yet washed it clean for a new beginning. This purifying aspect appears in many religious traditions, where water rituals symbolize cleansing and renewal. Baptism draws directly on this flood imagery, representing death to an old life and birth into a new one. Noah's Ark represents shelter amid chaos, a secure space when everything familiar disappears. Psychologists note how we create mental and emotional arcs during personal crises, safe havens of routine, relationship, or belief that carry us through troubled times. The ark's image reminds us that protection often comes not by escaping difficulty, but by finding safety within it. The Rainbow Covenant teaches about second chances and new beginnings. After catastrophe, life continues, often in ways that honor what was lost while embracing what might be. This pattern of destruction and renewal plays out in personal lives through experiences of failure and growth, loss and recovery. Noah himself embodies faithful persistence in the face of mockery and doubt. Building the ark required not just physical labor but moral courage to stand apart from his society. His story offers comfort to anyone who feels isolated for holding unpopular beliefs or making countercultural choices. The animals entering the ark two by two remind us of our connection to all living things. Noah saved not just human life but the broader community of creatures. This ecological dimension speaks powerfully today as we face environmental challenges that threaten countless species. Some interpreters see the flood as representing transitions in human consciousness. The pre-flood world symbolizes humanity's childhood, impulsive, self-centered, needing clear boundaries. The post-flood world, with its covenant and rainbow, represents a more mature relationship with the divine, based on mutual commitment rather than just obedience to rules. The flood narrative also explores human responsibility for creating a just society. The pre-flood world failed this test, filled with violence and corruption. Noah's new beginning offered another chance to build communities based on respect and care. Each generation since faces the same challenge. For those struggling with depression or overwhelming circumstances, the ark represents hope that current troubles, however vast, are not endless. The waters eventually recede. The dove returns with an olive leaf, new land appears. This message of endurance and eventual relief has sustained countless people through personal floods, in dreams and literature. Flood imagery often signals emotional overwhelm or unconscious content rising to awareness, like the biblical flood. These psychological waters both threaten and transform, destroying old patterns while creating space for new growth. The arc of the flood story, from mounting crisis through survival to new beginning, mirrors healthy psychological development. A time of reflection, Noah's final days. Noah lived 350 years after the flood, witnessing the rebirth of the world he had helped save. His final days unfolded in a land very different from the one he had known in his youth. Trees that had been saplings when he first stepped off the ark now stood tall and strong. Children born after the waters receded had grown old and died while Noah remained a living link to the world before. As he aged, Noah became keeper of memories no one else possessed. He alone remembered the faces of those lost in the waters. He alone knew the sound of rain falling on an empty world. Young people gathered around him in twilight hours, listening to tales of animals boarding the ark and rainbows appearing in freshly washed skies. Noah took special joy in his grandchildren and great-grandchildren. Seeing in each new face the fulfillment of God's promise to preserve human life, he blessed them with weathered hands, praying they would build a world kinder than the one the waters had claimed. Yet he also saw troubling signs: the growing pride at Babel, the return of violence, the slow forgetting of divine warnings. The vineyard Noah planted became his special retreat in later years. Among the vines, he found peace, watching seasons cycle from tender green shoots to heavy purple clusters. The rhythm of planting and harvest reminded him of life's continuity despite the flood's disruption. Wine from his grapes brought warmth to cold evenings and loosened tongues for storytelling. On quiet nights, Noah sometimes dreamed of the ark, its creaking timbers, the smell of animals, the sound of rain on the roof. He would wake reaching for his wife, grateful to find solid ground beneath their bed rather than rocking waves. These dream returns to the ark grew more frequent as his earthly journey neared its end. Noah's relationship with God deepened through his final years. The young man who had walked with God became an elder who sat in God's presence, comfortable with both speech and silence. Their covenant remained unbroken. The rainbow still appeared after storms, and the seasons continued their steady progression. When death finally approached, Noah faced it with the same quiet faith that had sustained him through the flood. He gathered his sons for final blessings, reminding them of their responsibility to teach future generations about both judgment and mercy. He spoke of the God who brings waters of destruction, but also waters of life. Noah died surrounded by family, his passing peaceful compared to the cataclysm he had survived. They buried him with honor, this man who had been both an ending and a beginning. With him died the last living memory of the world before the flood, its beauty and its corruption, its light and its darkness. yet Noah's legacy continued through bloodlines and stories. His sons ensured that each generation heard the account of the ark, the animals, the raven and the dove, the receding waters, the rainbow promise, around evening fires and morning tables. The story passed from parent to child, preserving its warning and its hope. In time, scribes would record these oral traditions, fixing Noah's story in written form through scrolls and codices. Translations and interpretations would reach beyond his descendants to touch all humanity. The ancient mariner who had navigated a world of water would continue guiding seekers across the centuries. The promise revisited, the rainbow and the covenant. When clouds gather and rain begins to fall, a primal fear still stirs within us. Will the waters rise beyond control? Will the world again drown beneath heaven's tears? Then comes the rainbow, arcing across clearing skies, 7 colors bridging earth and heaven, reminding us of an ancient promise. God's covenant with Noah stands as the first formal agreement between Creator and created in biblical tradition. Its terms were simple yet profound. Never again would all life be cut off by floodwaters. Never again would the earth be destroyed by water. The rainbow would serve as sign and reminder of this divine commitment. Unlike later biblical covenants, this agreement required no human response. It represented pure grace, a unilateral promise from God to all living creatures. Noah and his descendants didn't need to fulfill conditions or meet obligations to maintain this covenant. The rainbow appeared whether humans remembered or forgot. Whether they turned toward God or away, this unconditional quality makes the Noah covenant unique. Later agreements with Abraham, Moses, and David would involve mutual responsibilities, blessings contingent on faithfulness, but the rainbow promise stood apart, a gift freely given to a world still damp from judgment. The covenant extended beyond humanity to include every living creature, the animals saved on the ark and all their descendants. This inclusion reminds us that God's care encompasses the entire created order, not just human beings. The rainbow shines for sparrow as much as for sovereign, for deer as much as for diplomat. 7 colors span the rainbow's arch, perhaps echoing the 7 days of creation. What floods destroyed, God promised to preserve, the rhythm of seasons, the boundaries of seas. The fruitfulness of earth. The world might face troubles and trials, but never again total aquatic annihilation. Local floods might come, but not world-ending waters. Rainbows appear precisely when storm meets sunshine, when darkness gives way to light. This timing itself carries meaning. The covenant comes not before trouble, but after enduring it. Hope arrives not by avoiding clouds, but by passing through them into renewed brightness. Throughout history, peoples across cultures have looked up at rainbows with wonder. Many traditions independently associated these colored arcs with divine messages or bridges between worlds. The Genesis account gives specific meaning to this universal experience. Each rainbow announces again the message never again. For Noah's immediate family, rainbows likely triggered powerful memories, the years of building, the months of floating, the grief of loss, the joy of new beginnings. With each sighting, they remembered both judgment and mercy, the delicate balance between divine justice and compassion. Today, we've explained the science behind rainbows, light refracting through water droplets, splitting into its component colors, yet this knowledge doesn't diminish their wonder or symbolic power. If anything, understanding the precision of natural laws that create rainbows reinforces faith in the Creator who established those laws and promises to maintain them. The flood in modern culture. Noah's Ark appears in children's nurseries, adorned with cartoon animals marching 2 by 2. Colorful boat-shaped toys fill playrooms, introducing the flood story through play. These gentle versions focus on animals and rainbows while softening the flood's harsher elements, making ancient truths accessible to young minds. Museums and theme parks have built full-sized Ark replicas, allowing visitors to experience the vessel's massive scale. Kentucky's Ark encounter stretches longer than a football field, helping people visualize the biblical dimensions. Inside, exhibits attempt to answer practical questions about animal care, waste management, and food storage during the year-long voyage. Filmmakers regularly revisit the flood narrative, each generation finding new aspects to explore. Some productions aim for biblical accuracy, while others use the story as inspiration for reimagined narratives. These range from reverent adaptation to controversial reinterpretations that emphasize environmental themes or psychological elements. Scientists studying climate change sometimes invoke Noah when discussing rising sea levels and extreme weather patterns, though no global flood threatens. Coastal communities face increasing inundation as polar ice melts. These modern concerns lend new resonance to ancient fears of water overwhelming civilization. Conservation efforts occasionally adopt ARC terminology for projects preserving endangered species. Seed banks storing plant genetic material against future catastrophes explicitly reference Noah's mission to preserve biological diversity. These modern arcs aim to prevent extinctions rather than just survive them. Artists continue finding inspiration in the flood narrative. Contemporary paintings often focus less on the physical flood and more on its emotional and spiritual dimensions: isolation, faith during crisis, hope for renewal. Abstract works evoke water's dual capacity for destruction and cleansing. Popular songs reference the flood in lyrics about survival and perseverance, from folk traditions to modern rock. Musicians draw on Noah's story when addressing themes of endurance through overwhelming circumstances. The image of building an ark against approaching storms remains powerful across musical genres. Fantasy and science fiction writers create flood-inspired apocalyptic scenarios, worlds covered in water, with remnant humanity surviving on ships or floating cities. These speculative works often explore themes from Noah's story: who deserves to be saved, how to rebuild society, what values to preserve. Religious communities still find deep meaning in the flood narrative. Sermons explore its lessons about faith, obedience, justice, and mercy. Bible studies debate details and implications. Prayer groups invoke Noah when facing personal or communal floods, not of water, but of trouble, change, or uncertainty. Across languages and cultures, flood imagery enriches our speech. We talk of being swamped with work, drowning in details, or building arcs against approaching troubles. These metaphors connect our daily experiences to ancient wisdom, reminding us that others have faced overwhelming circumstances and emerged to see rainbows. The end of the story, a quiet reflection. The story of the flood never truly ends. It flows through human consciousness like the waters once flowed over the earth, shaping our understanding of ourselves and our place in creation. Though the physical waters receded thousands of years ago, their memory remains, carried in stories, symbols, and silent fears. Noah's journey speaks across time of both warning and hope. It warns of consequences when societies abandon compassion and justice. It warns that actions have outcomes, that moral choices matter. Yet it also offers hope, that even after devastating loss, new beginnings remain possible, life continues, rainbows appear. We are all, in some sense, Noah's children, whether through literal descent or spiritual kinship. We inherit both his challenges and his promises. Like Noah, we face choices about what to preserve and what to leave behind. Like Noah, we build arcs of various kinds, communities, traditions. Values that carry precious cargo through threatening waters. The earth still bears marks of water's power, canyons carved by ancient floods, coastlines shaped by rising seas. Fossils of marine creatures found far inland. These remind us how fluid our seemingly solid world truly is. Water still brings both life and death, still nurtures and destroys, still cleanses and overwhelms. In quiet moments of reflection, we might wonder what Noah thought during those first nights after the flood. Did he look up at stars unchanged by the cataclysm below? Did he marvel at familiar constellations shining over an unfamiliar world? Did he wonder if the waters might someday return, despite divine promises? Perhaps the most profound lesson of Noah's story is that endings contain beginnings. The flood that ended one world created space for another. The judgment that swept away corruption allowed for renewal. The waters that brought death also carried life. This pattern of ending as beginning offers comfort when we face our own personal floods. The rainbow remains, arching over our troubled world just as it spanned Noah's damp new beginning. It appears unexpectedly, when storms begin to clear but clouds still linger. Its beauty surprises us, stopping our busy movements, lifting our eyes skyward. For a moment, we share Noah's experience, standing on wet ground, looking up at heaven's multicolored message. That message, stripped to its essence, is simple: never again. Never again will water destroy all life, never again will the Creator abandon creation. Though local floods may come, though waters may rise and fall, the world continues its journey through space, carrying all living things in its ark-like embrace. As our reflection on Noah's story draws to a close, we might listen for echoes of ancient rain on modern rooftops, we might look more carefully at gathering clouds and clearing skies, we might notice moments when light meets water and creates rainbows. In these ordinary experiences lie connections to extraordinary events: a family saved, a world renewed, a promise made. The final message of the flood story whispers gently, perfect for those drifting towards sleep: despite chaos and catastrophe, order returns; despite darkness and depths, light breaks through. Despite endings that seem final, new chapters await. The waters recede, the dove returns, the rainbow shines, life goes on.